Part 28. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 273. The next day, early in the morning, Musian held his waist and slowly opened his eyes, looking at the high beams under the ceiling. His eyes were scattered, thinking about life. Then, he glanced at the green vines on his wrist, and then turned his head helplessly to look at Yao Meng, who was curled up in the quilt beside him. Under the soft quilt, the snow-white shoulders were slightly exposed. She closed her eyes slightly, her posture was moving, her bright and attractive rosy mouth, her flawless face with a faint blush, and her delicate white collarbone was faintly visible under her snow-white jade neck. Even though Musian had gone through the compulsory destruction last night, he still couldn't help but secretly sigh at her charm when he saw the fairy face when she was asleep. Although he was controlled by Yao Meng's green vines and even interrogated last night, Musian still liked the real owner of the Yaokai Holy Land. There was no way, after all, this was a world that valued appearance. Musian touched his waist, feeling the emptiness of the natural furnace, and couldn't help but sigh again. It must be said that the Green Emperor is still the Green Emperor. Not only is he experienced, but he also has a wealth of methods for interrogation, so that Musian once thought that Yao Meng had also read the book The Way to Control a Husband. Looking at Yao Meng, who was sleeping soundly again, Musian quietly urged his spiritual energy to try to untie the vine. However, the pure world green lotus was still slowly turning in the room, so that his spiritual energy was still difficult to activate. Give up, unless I take the initiative to put away the pure world green lotus, you can't unseal it. Yao Meng's voice suddenly sounded in the room. She didn't know when she had opened her emerald-like gorgeous eyes and stared at him with a smile. Under Musian's gaze, Yao Meng stood up, covered the quilt with one hand, and pressed it on her full and plump chest. Although she was a fairy, her eyes were captivating and charming at this moment. The fairy image of the past was more charming at this moment, and the huge contrast made people's heartbeats speed up involuntarily. Muji couldn't help but look at her several more times, and was almost attracted to her. He suppressed his inner impulse and shook his head. I never planned to break free from the green vine, but I was a little curious about the seal of the green vine. Don't you blame me for forcing you last night. Yao Meng's eyes showed a faint smile. This matter is my fault. No matter what, I am still devoted to Fairy Sister. Musian put one hand on Yao Meng's beautiful white jade back and stared at her affectionately. Yao Meng chuckled and said, I'm afraid you said the same thing to Gong Lianyu. She probably wasn't upset about my intimacy with other women, but she just couldn't stand Gong Lianyu's arrogance. Musian understood in his heart and said sincerely, I only said this to the fairy, I swear. Yao Meng looked at Musian with a smile, and a seductive arc appeared at the corner of her mouth. She asked again, you won't blame me for treating you like that last night? It's my honor to make my own contribution to the prosperity of Dongzhou. Musian paused, stared at Yao Meng's gorgeous eyes, and said softly, besides, this is also my own will. This is actually the truth. Although Musian was squeezed and squeezed like ketchup yesterday until the last drop of ketchup was squeezed out, but his love for Yao Meng remained unchanged. Firstly, it was because the beauty of this fairy made people want to taste it, and secondly, although she interrogated him last night, she was still very measured and did not do it too much. At least it was not too much for Musian. It was just that the spiritual energy in the natural furnace needed to be replenished, which was nothing for him. After all, he was strong and his energy could be restored quickly. Yao Meng's eyebrows revealed a touch of tenderness, and raised her hand to hold Musian's face in her arms. What a fragrant smell, and so soft. Musian closed his eyes slightly, feeling the warmth and beauty of people's hearts. This is the peak of life I am pursuing. At this time, Yao Meng suddenly said, the day after tomorrow's Ascension Conference has officially begun. The formation in the martial world is very special. If I go with you, it may cause unnecessary trouble, but the Jade Slip will protect you. so your safety is not a problem. If it doesn't work, it's okay for you to give up the Ascension Conference. I know my limits and will do my best not to disappoint the fairy sister, Musian said. You don't have to push yourself too hard. If it doesn't work, you can return to Yaokai with me in the future. I will guide you to practice and let you refine your spirit and return to the void as soon as possible. Yao Meng showed a fairy-like pure smile, but her words revealed her true intentions. This is the soft rice I want to eat. I will always push the fairy sister alone. Musian said sincerely, thank you sister, I will consider it carefully in the future. After feeling the warmth of people in Yao Meng's arms, Musian said at the right time, I accidentally broke the test monument of my senior sister before, I may have to go to Lianji Peak again. Yao Meng smiled and nodded. While Musian was attending the Ascension Conference, she should also refine the spiritual energy of the natural furnace and deal with the internal affairs of the Yaokai Holy Land. Lianji Peak. Musian threw the paper crane into Lianji Peak. After an unknown amount of time, a very familiar figure came into view. She was dressed quite charmingly, with a red cheongsam wrapped around her sexy and tight body. The slit cheongsam showed off her snow-white and round long legs, and she was wearing a pair of small and exquisite red embroidered shoes. Sister Feiying, why is it you? Musian asked with a surprised tone when he saw Lan Feiying. Lan Feiying smiled charmingly, I came to ask my sister some questions about the exercises, and I happened to see your paper crane, so I came out to pick you up. Where is my senior sister? Looking at Lan Feiying's graceful figure flying on the sword, Musian couldn't help but glance at her hot and sexy body. She was reading a book, so I came out for her. Lan Feiying looked at Musian with a smile, why? Are you disappointed that you can't see my sister? Musian came back to his senses, shook his head and smiled, how could it be, I am also very happy to see Sister Feiying. As he said, he took courage and put one hand on Lan Feiying's plump and attractive waist. Be careful if you touch me again, I will tell my sister. Lan Feiying gently raised her hand to slap his claws away and gave him a glare, but such a charming beauty, even with angry eyes, still had a lot of charm. If such a look is brought to the bed, under the kind of charming gaze with a slight anger, just thinking about it makes people excited. Sister Feiying, you have changed. You were not like this before, Musian said a little sadly. You would not refuse me when I hugged you before. This is Lianji Peak, do you want to be caught by your sister? Lan Feiying gave Musian a charming big roll of the eyes, summoned the flying sword and flew towards a pavilion deep in Lianji Peak. Musian immediately followed with the sword, looking at the beautiful red figure of the beauty, and said, do you mean you can go out? Sure, you can do whatever you want when you go out. Lan Feiying's words made Musian stunned for a moment, thinking that I was just joking. When did Sister Feiying become so open? Such a graceful and plump body, Musian had been coveting for a long time in the past, but at that time Lan Feiying had been practicing in seclusion in Tianji Peak, so he had no chance to touch it. Unexpectedly, she agreed so casually at this moment. Lan Feiying looked over slightly and smiled charmingly, we'll talk about it after you beat me at the Ascension Conference. Musian smiled gently, forget it, it's a bit too much to bully Sister Feiying. In Zhuzhou, according to the current ranking of geniuses in Musian's mind, they are roughly divided into T0, T1, and T2 levels. The Destiny protagonists like Ya Lingxian and Bai Ruoxi are in the T0 level, while the genius descendants of the ancient families in Zhuzhou are in T1. And Musian's current strength is at the top of the T1 group. Even if it is the Destiny protagonists like Bai Ruoxi and Ya Lingxian, if he wants, he can easily suppress them and make them beg for mercy. Last night, facing Yao Meng, a female emperor in the Hedao realm, he took the initiative at the beginning, although he was the one who begged for mercy in the second half of the night. With his current level, the probability of beating Lan Feiying should be quite high. Lan Feiying was obviously provoked. She immediately chuckled, glanced at him, and said, if you can beat me at the Ascension Conference, you can do whatever you want afterwards. Musian immediately shook his head and said, "No, I don't like taking advantage of others." "You are quite a gentleman, aren't you?" Lan Fading laughed tenderly. "Then how about this, if you lose, you can let me do whatever I want?" "That's fair, right?" Musian hesitated and said, "Are you serious, Sister Fading?" Of course. Lan Fading slowed down her flying speed a bit, staring at Musian with a charming smile on her face. "How about it? Since Sister Fading is so confident, I'll play with you for a while." Musian accepted it happily, but didn't notice the cunning arc at the corner of Lan Fading's mouth. Boom! A roar sounded in the sky, announcing that the oath between the two was recognized by the Avenue. Musian didn't have much psychological fluctuations in this regard. Although he is a gentleman, he would not do anything too extreme even if he really beat Lan Fading, but since the other party has taken the initiative to challenge him, he can't avoid the fight now, right? Anyway, his goal this time is to win the first place in the Ascension Conference. No matter who he meets, he must win. For his future happiness. While chatting, the two came to the pavilion unknowingly, and Musian soon saw Lan Murian in a moon-white dress. She was holding a book in her hand and reading quietly. Lan Murian sat in a dignified and elegant posture, with the hem of her skirt reaching her knees. Her two jade legs in white boots were exposed to the cold air, revealing a translucent ice crystal texture, which aroused infinite reverie. Compared with her sister's charm and enchantment, Lan Murian's temperament is obviously different from Lan Fading's. It is not an exaggeration to say that she is ice and fire. Lan Fading did not enter the pavilion, but gave the two a certain space for conversation outside the pavilion. On the other side, Lan Murian's eyes moved away from the book and glanced at Musian inadvertently. Senior Sister Musian immediately greeted her. "Mr. Mu, have you finally found some free time after your tryst with Miss Bai and Junior Sister Lingxian?" Lan Murian's voice was clear and her pretty face was covered with frost. Senior Sister's reaction was colder than I expected. Musian smiled awkwardly but politely. "Senior Sister, you are joking. The Ascension Conference is coming soon. I have been concentrating on practicing to prepare for the upcoming Ascension Conference." Lan Murian obviously remembered what happened when she met Lin Qiu before, and said indifferently, "So Mr. Mu still practices seriously? I thought you were busy pleasing women every day." Musian said helplessly, "Senior Sister, you have a deep misunderstanding of me. I have been worried about the Ascension Conference these days and want to win a better ranking. If so, you should reduce contact with other people and concentrate on practicing." Lan Murian gave advice. "Senior Sister is right. I will concentrate on practicing and return to the void as soon as possible." Musian nodded humbly. Lan Murian nodded with satisfaction. "Then don't go to Miss Bai's room and deck Sinyuan casually in the future. I will ask Senior Sister Yan to arrange a new villa for you later. You can live there in the future." Musian. "Senior Sister?" Musian reacted and hesitated. Lan Murian put down the book and explained seriously, "The most taboo thing in cultivation is a relationship that holds you back. Constant contact with the opposite sex around you will only affect the speed of cultivation." Musian had to keep silent. "Sister is right. I will practice with peace of mind in the future then." He used a more obscure way to perfunctory. Fortunately, Lan Murian did not dwell on this topic and asked again, "What do you want to see me for?" At the same time, he glanced at the tall and sexy sister standing outside the pavilion. Musian hesitated for a moment and took out an exquisite jade box from the ring. "There are 1,000,000 spirit stones in it," Musian said. Lan Murian subconsciously glanced at Musian and said, "What do you mean?" "I accidentally broke the test monument of my sister, so this is compensation," Musian said helplessly. Even he did not expect that Wei Mengru could blow up the test monument by testing his own luck. The test monument will not break for no reason. There must be a lot of things going on, right? Lan Mulian looked at Musian meaningfully. It's a long story. I'll tell you about it in my spare time. Musian first prepared for the next meeting. Then, he took out another jade box and placed it on the table. Lan Mulian glanced at him casually, and then gently opened the jade box. In the jade box was a sea blue spiritual stone with complex patterns engraved on it, and even surging water could be seen in it. This is a special spiritual stone I got in the Sword Palace before. It is very suitable for making jewelry, Musian said. Lan Mulian gently stroked the smooth sea blue spiritual stone with her slender hand, without raising her eyes, and said calmly, "Is this also compensation?" Musian shook his head. "This is my gift to my senior sister." Lan Mulian sneered, "You have given similar gifts to other people, right?" Musian did not deny it, but stared at Lan Mulian's beautiful profile, which was as beautiful as a painting and as elegant as a flower, and whispered, "But this aquamarine is the only one, at least I only have this one." Lan Mulian lowered her eyes slightly, looking at the aquamarine spirit stone in front of her. She was silent for a long time before throwing the jade box of 1,000,000 spirit stones to Musian. The test tablet is used to test the disciple's luck and strength. There is nothing to say if it is broken. You don't need to pay for it. Take your spirit stone back and practice with peace of mind. She accepted the gift. Musian was happy in his heart, but he didn't show it on the surface. "Then I will go back first." Seeing Lan Mulian nodded slightly, Musian put the jade box of 1,000,000 spirit stones into the ring, and then left the court. On the other side, Lan Fading looked at the young man and saw that he looked relieved. She couldn't help but smile charmingly and said in a voice transmission, "It seems that your goal today has been achieved." "This is also thanks to Sister Fading," Musian also transmitted in a voice transmission. Lan Fading uttered a "What's the use of just saying thank you? Otherwise, do you want me to sacrifice myself?" Musian said in his heart, and then inadvertently glanced at Lan Mulian behind him. Seeing that she was drinking tea under the pavilion, he took the opportunity to take out a special spiritual stone with red patterns from the ring and handed it to Lan Fading. Lan Fading's eyes moved slightly, and she looked up at him. "What is this?" "Phoenix Ming stone, a special spiritual stone. I have always wanted to give it to Sister Fading, but I have never found a suitable opportunity." Musian transmitted in a voice transmission. "Sister Fading, don't refuse. You took good care of me in Tianqian City in the past, and I have always wanted to find an opportunity to repay you for your care in the past." Musian's voice transmission this time was more sincere. When they were in Tianqian City in the past, Lan Fading and he had a good relationship. At first, Musian thought that she was just so kind to him because he was the young master of the Mu family. But since he knew that she was from the Lan family, he realized that she probably just had some good feelings for him, and there was not much interest involved. Lan Fading glanced at him lightly, raised her hand and stroked Musian's handsome face with a smile, and said with a smile, "In this case, sister, you are welcome. It's good that Sister Fading likes it." Musian smiled. He was not worried that the two sisters would find the spirit stones in each other's hands. As he said before, the special spirit stones were just a way of thanking each other. Even if they really saw the special spirit stones in each other's hands, there would be no problem. Because Lan Mulian was still in the pavilion, Musian did not dare to flirt with her sister in front of his senior sister, so he quickly said goodbye to Lan Fading. As Musian left, Lan Fading also put away the enchanting red spirit stone. After watching Musian leave, she turned her head to look at the sister with a cold temperament under the pavilion. Then, she walked into the pavilion. "You came to see me today, it should not be just to chat with me, right?" Lan Mulian sat on the stone chair and elegantly made tea for her sister. "The day after tomorrow is the beginning of the Ascension Conference. Sister, are you really not going to participate?" Lan Fading stared at her sister with charming eyes. Lan Mulian shook her head gently. "It is not appropriate for me to participate in the Ascension Conference. But after all, sister is only 2 or 3 years older than us. Even if you participate in the Ascension Conference, others will have nothing to say. Lan Feiying put her hand on her chin, tilted her head innocently, and said, or is sister afraid of losing? Lan Mulian glanced at her sister lightly and said, it is better not to do this kind of childish provocation, it is just a waste of time. You know how much difference there is between the Return to Void realm and the Refining God realm. Return to Void and Refining God are indeed an unbridgeable gap, but isn't there a disciple who has just entered the sect in the glazed hall who has comprehended a trace of Harem? In terms of strength alone, it should be no weaker than sister, right? Lan Feiying said with a smile. Sister hasn't refined the enlightenment seed that Musian gave to sister yet, she continued. Lan Mulian was silent. Since the day Musian sent the enlightenment seed, almost every day there are disciples wandering around the Lianji peak, expecting this senior sister to refine the enlightenment seed and become the strongest of the younger generation of the sect. However, to this day, Lan Mulian has not yet refined the enlightenment seed. With your ability, it is impossible that you cannot refine the enlightenment seed. Why are you still unwilling to refine it? Lan Feiying continued to ask, her tone full of confusion. Lan Mulian was silent for a while, and gently put down the book in her hand. We have to wait for a suitable time. Because you are not ready to accept his gift, Lan Feiying asked. The enlightenment seed is the gift of the great Dao. Only the thunder tribulation above the enlightenment realm has a very small probability of giving birth to a holy object. With it, you can comprehend a ray of Dao rhyme. And the improvement brought by this ray of Dao rhyme is exaggerated beyond people's imagination. At the same peak of refining spirit, the difference between those who have comprehended Dao rhyme and those who have not comprehended Dao rhyme is not as big as the sky and the earth, but at least more than 30% difference. If the person who comprehended the Dao rhyme in the glazed palace this time was at the 8th level of spirit refining, he would still be able to fight even against the existence of Return to Void realm. Seeing that Lan Mulian hadn't spoken, Lan Feiying asked faintly, do you like that little guy? Lan Mulian said calmly, I just treat him as my junior brother. She paused and added, at most, I pay a little more attention to him than others. However, Lan Feiying just uttered a "huh," and her rosy lips outlined a charming arc, and said softly, let's not talk about what you think for now, but he seems to care about you very much, otherwise he wouldn't even give you the enlightenment seed. But you never refined the enlightenment seed. Are you not ready to accept his love? Lan Mulian slightly tilted her head to look at her charming and enchanting sister, and said, what do you want to say? If the enlightenment seed is returned to him now, it will probably hurt his heart. With your personality, you won't do that. After all, you have a lot of good feelings for him, so since you don't plan to return it to him, refine it earlier, which will be of great help to your future practice. You don't want to be defeated by others in the future, right? Lan Feiying continued. Lan Mulian's eyes were sharp, and she said calmly, even if I don't use the enlightenment seed, I won't lose. There are only 1 or 2 cultivators under the age of 26 who have reached the Return to Void realm in the entire Jizhu. Even Wei Mengru has not yet reached the refining spirit Return to Void realm. Among her peers, Lan Mulian's talent is enough to look down on the entire Jizhu. This is already recognized by everyone in the sect. Lan Feiying pondered for a moment, playing with a strand of slightly curled hair with her fingertips, and said softly, since you started practicing, have you ever lost? Lan Mulian said lightly, no. Lan Feiying gently stared at Lan Mulian's eyes and the task content on the system interface. Task, defeat Sister Lan Mulian and let her recognize her feelings, reward, a first-grade technique. Then Sister's perfect record will probably end from this Ascension Conference. I'll end it myself, Lan Feiying said faintly. For the first time, a trace of surprise appeared in Lan Mulian's eyes. She turned her head to look at her sister and whispered, are you serious? Of course, Lan Feiying smiled. Maybe when I win, I can take that little guy Musian with me. She placed a paper crane on the table, and the content of the letter was exactly what the sect leader Shang Yanfei had written before. Lan Murian stared at her sister's autumn water eyes and her serious expression. After a while, a beautiful smile like breaking the ice bloomed on her face. Okay. Then let me see how much you have grown in the past few years at this Ascension conference. Warm TI. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 274. Musian naturally didn't know what the two sisters talked about in Lianji Peak. After he flew back to Liulai Palace on his sword, he didn't return immediately, but went to Dexin Garden to accompany Qianer and Lingxian to communicate and exchange feelings. A qualified fish pond owner will never neglect any fish in the fish pond. This is the time management of Master Mu. Because the Ascension Conference is imminent, everyone wants to improve their strength as much as possible before going to the martial world. Therefore, after chatting with Musian for a while, Ya Lingxian went into the room with Musian's farewell and meditated at ease. Brother Mu, please send Qianer off. She seems to have something to say to you. Ya Lingxian suddenly spoke when she stood at the door of the room. Ya Qian was wearing a green logo skirt. Her plump and soft chest proudly supported the fabric. There was a touch of snow-white skin between her jade legs wrapped in green boots and the hem of the skirt. She was originally following the two of them, and when she heard this, her eyes immediately became a little more flustered, and she looked up at her sister. Ya Lingxian looked at her sister with a smile, and her eyes fell on Musian again, saying, Brother Mu, is everything okay? When she said this, she winked at him playfully, with a hint of cunning in her eyes. Sister Lingxian is really generous, she won't be jealous. Musian smiled and nodded. By the way, Brother Mu, do you know what the content of the paper crane yesterday means? Ya Lingxian suddenly remembered this matter and turned to look at the boy who was about to send Ye Qian back to the house. It's not clear yet, I can only investigate slowly. Musian shook his head. That being said, he has no idea where to start investigating the matter of the original witch. At that time, what the original witch said, was it said to someone or to him? This matter is also very worrying. If the original witch's long time no see was really meant for me, this would be a bit scary. Musian barely gathered his thoughts, turned his head and looked at Ye Qian's pure face, and smiled. Let's go, Qianer, I'll take you back. The two walked along a corridor to Ye Qian's room. Musian followed the girl and glanced left and right. After confirming that Ye Lingxian was meditating and practicing peacefully, he boldly reached out and held her soft little hand. Ye Qian's body trembled slightly, secretly glanced at Musian, and then quickly lowered her head and followed him, letting him hold her hand. What level of soul refining is Sister Qianer now? Musian's eyes wandered on the snowy scene outside the courtyard, and he asked casually. Fourth level of soul refining, Ye Qian said softly. I remember Qianer's rank was lower than mine before, although the beauty did waste some time practicing by working day and night, her practice speed is too fast. Musian sighed in his heart, and his eyes couldn't help but glance at Ye Qian twice more. It must be said that the girl's body development proportion is quite good. Although she still has some girlish feeling, her figure has gradually developed into a queen. It is not an exaggeration to say that she has a childlike face and a big body. Brother Mu, what's wrong? Ye Qian felt a little uneasy when being stared at, and her eyes subconsciously looked away. Musian stared at Ye Qian's pure and pretty face. The slightly messy hair fell on the classical and delicate oval face. She pursed her rosy lips slightly. At the most innocent age, she mixed the charm of charm and purity. Sister Qianer seems to have something on her face. Musian put his hand on his chin, observed Ye Qian up and down for a few times, and suddenly spoke. At the same time, he secretly took out a green spiritual stone from the ring. Ye Qian subconsciously reached out to wipe the thing on her face, but at this time, Musian grabbed her wrist with one hand, pulled her into the room next to her, and closed the door. When she noticed Musian's fiery gaze, Yechian shyly asked, "Brother Mu?" A pair of moist eyes full of shame secretly peeked at Musian's face, and hidden in the eyes, it seemed that in addition to shyness, there was also some inexplicable little expectation. Musian reached out and gently stroked Yechian's delicate and flawless face, and then held up a strand of hair, and said softly, "Did this thing fall from you?" He took out a special green spiritual stone from Yechian's hair. Yechian was stunned for a moment, and looked at Musian with surprise. "When did Brother Mu put it on me?" "Do you like it?" Musian asked with a smile. The sisters of the Ye family were only 16 or 17 years old. A gift from their loved ones naturally made them very happy. Yechian was shy. Upon hearing this, she blushed and said softly. She clasped her hands gently in front of her chest, holding the emerald green spirit stone. "Thank you." Musian shook his head. "Sister Chien, you can't just say thank you verbally." Yechian subconsciously raised her head. "What does Brother Mu mean?" Musian stared into Yechian's eyes and did not answer. Instead, he pressed her wrists behind the door, and then, under Yechian's shameful gaze, he leaned forward slightly, kissed her face and neck, and then gradually moved up again, occupying her soft lips. Yechian wanted to avoid Musian, but when she looked up and saw his affectionate eyes, her body gradually softened, and she instinctively closed her eyes, responding to Musian's enthusiasm. After an unknown amount of time, Musian finally let go of the girl, watching her panting lightly and exhaling hot air from her mouth, and smiled. "Sister Chiener is so cute. Compared to Ye Lingxian, this girl is too innocent." It's no wonder that Ye Lingxian was so vigilant when she learned that Yechian was cheated by Musian, and even went to visit the Mu family. Musian hugged Yechian's slender waist, came to the bedside and sat down, and said softly, "By the way, Sister Chiener, have you received a letter from the sect master before?" Yechian was still in a trance just now, until she heard Musian's words. She woke up from her thoughts just now, raised her head and stayed on Musian's handsome face for a moment, and nodded gently. As expected, Chiener also received it. Is the sect master planning to let them fight among themselves so that she can benefit as a fisherman? Musian sighed softly. Actually, I've been troubled by this matter recently. Is Brother Mu's trouble related to this matter? Yechian blinked, and looked at Musian with her black and white peach blossom eyes. Musian nodded slightly. I was born a free man, and it's really not appropriate to be a reward for the competition. He put one hand on Yechian's leg, holding her slightly cold and soft little hand, and whispered, "Sister Chiener, can you help me?" "How can I help Brother Mu?" Yechian tilted her head slightly, puzzled. "As long as we can win as many games as possible in the Ascension Conference, and even advance to the finals in the end, that's enough," Musian said softly. He gently held Yechian's cool and smooth little hand and continued, "During the Ascension Conference, I will also help Sister Chiener as much as possible. This is also part of Musian's plan. Yechian is a good and obedient girl. What he has to do now is to expand the number of people in the Protecting Mu sect as much as possible. As long as the people of the Protecting Mu sect finally enter the finals, the additional rewards of this Ascension Conference can be said to be dispensable." Feeling the warmth of Musian's palm, Yechian whispered, "Win the Ascension Conference game, and then give up the hidden reward given by the sect master. Will this make Brother Mu relax?" Musian smiled and nodded. "Sister Chiener is really a smart child." Yechian's eyes flickered slightly, as if she was thinking about Musian's words. After a while, she smiled softly. "I know. I will help you, Brother Mu." "Thank you. With the help of Sister Chiener, I will be much more relaxed in the future." Musian breathed a sigh of relief. Yechian smiled lightly, but there was a strange luster in her eyes. After being intimate with Yechian for a long time in the room, Musian left the room contentedly. Yechian sat on the bed, gently twisting the hair on her forehead, staring at Musian's back as he left. After an unknown amount of time, she withdrew her gaze. "I'm sorry, brother Mu," she whispered to herself. "Chiener won't listen to you this time. Whether it's for herself or for her sister's future happiness." After Yujian returned to Tianhe Garden, Musian came to the room where the maid usually rested. Wei Mengru was practicing in seclusion at this time. The influence of the original witch last night seemed to have completely disappeared today. She closed her eyes slightly, and her beautiful face showed a cold expression. As if she had noticed Musian's presence, Wei Mengru slowly opened her eyes. The two looked at each other for a moment. Wei Mengru noticed that her young master seemed to be admiring her face. She turned away silently and said coldly, "What's the matter?" The expression looked no different from the past, but the slightly flashing eyes revealed something. Now when she saw Musian, the maid would think of what happened in the court yesterday. Although it was the obsession of the original witch that forced her to take the initiative to do such an intimate action to Musian, no matter what, it was her own body. And she woke up during the kiss and happened to feel that kiss. Just thinking about it makes people feel an inexplicable sense of shame. Musian obviously didn't notice Wei Mengru's change. He walked into the room and said with a smile, "Can't I come to visit you if I have nothing to do?" While speaking, he came to the bed next to Wei Mengru and sat down, looking up and saying, "Sister Mengru, do you have any ideas about this Ascension conference?" Sure enough, she came for this. Wei Mengru didn't raise her eyes and said, "I'm not interested, I'll do my best." She paused, glanced at Musian inadvertently, maintaining her usual cold attitude, with a cold arc at the corner of her mouth. "But have you thought about who you are going to marry after this Ascension conference is over?" "What do you mean by marrying out?" Musian's mouth twitched slightly, and he noticed Wei Mengru's teasing eyes, and suddenly said, "If I really get married, wouldn't you have to be a maidservant?" "Is this your attitude when asking for help from others?" Wei Mengru glanced at Musian. She naturally knew the reason why Musian came to find her. The people who targeted Musian this time were all girls who were close to him, but she was an exception. If their relationship could be said to be close, it was, but that close relationship was not a love affair. If Musian wanted to find a way out, he would definitely come to her. As long as Wei Mengru is the winner of the Ascension Conference, the hidden reward in the letter from the sect master will have no effect. Of course, the premise is that Wei Mengru is willing to help, and she must eventually win the first place in the Ascension Conference. Yechian is a safety net, and so is Wei Mengru. "You can let me help you, but I have a condition," Wei Mengru suddenly said. Suddenly, the smell of N.T.R. books quietly permeated. Musian said calmly, "Sister Mengru, please speak." Wei Mengru stared at Musian and said, "After the Ascension Conference, lend me the black box in your hand." Musian was stunned for a moment, and doubtfully said, "What do you want the black box for?" After saying that, he briefly pondered for a moment, then nodded slightly, and said, "I can lend it to you, but you must ensure that I am by your side when you use the black box." "And that black box, it seems that only I can open it," Musian added. Judging from the current situation, there seems to be some connection between the original witch and Wei Mengru, and he is not too confident to let Wei Mengru contact the black box alone. Wei Mengru nodded silently. "Then, it's a deal?" Musian asked tentatively. Wei Mengru nodded, and then, when she saw her young master's relieved look, she said coldly, "Isn't it too early to relax now?" Musian shook his head and smiled, "I believe in Sister Mengru's strength. What's more," he paused, raised his fingertips, and a green lotus quietly bloomed at his fingertips. "After all, I also have the pure world green lotus." The contestants this time are all in the refining god realm, which is not much different from my level. The sealing ability of the pure world green lotus is very restraining to them. Musian smiled. Not only Yechian and Wei Mengru, he himself also has combat power. Not to say that he is sure to win, but at least, even if he faces Ye Lingxian, he has the strength to fight. However, after the words fell, Wei Mengru did not say anything, just looked at Musian strangely. Don't you know yet? Musian smiled and looked sideways. Know what? Senior sister Lan is also participating in the competition. This time she will go to the martial world with us. Musian's indifferent smile gradually froze on his face. What the hell? What does senior sister want to do? Isn't this obviously bullying? Originally, everyone was in the refining god realm, competing with each other for combat experience and foundation, but suddenly a land immortal in the return to void realm came. This is no less than a dimensionality reduction attack. It shouldn't be right. Senior sister is not the kind of aggressive personality. Could it be that she also likes me? Musian murmured in disbelief. The realm of that noble and cold senior sister is real. If Musian is unlucky to bump into her in advance at this Ascension conference, he can consider surrendering in advance. The pure world green lotus is only useful for cultivators of the same realm, but when facing the return to void realm, the effect is not to say negligible, but it is definitely not a killer move. I don't know either. The news just spread during the day, Wei Mengru said lightly. Then, looking at her young master's face that suddenly looked a little ugly, the maid couldn't help but slightly raised a happy arc at the corner of her mouth. Seeing Musian's headache because of his feelings, she was much happier. After all, she was just a bystander. It should be just a bystander. Wei Mengru suddenly felt a needle-like tingling sensation in her chest. She subconsciously placed her slender hand on her chest, and her pupils seemed to lose focus slightly. At this moment, it seemed that there was a voice in her heart whispering something. She said, "He can only be mine." Wei Mengru looked down at the bronze mirror on the table in a trance, and a woman's face was reflected in the mirror. A very beautiful, slightly pale, sickly beautiful face. No matter what, even if Musian was worried about Lan Murian's participation, the day of the Ascension Conference was slowly approaching. And 2 days later, the Ascension Conference, which had caused a sensation in Kyushu and revolved around 3 imperial-level medicinal herbs, finally opened grandly. However, most people probably wouldn't have thought that whether it was Bairu Oxy or the Lan sisters, they were actually eyeing the hidden reward behind the Ascension Conference. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 275. Yaokai Holy Land. The surroundings were filled with hazy white mist. Yao Meng wore a long dress with a green base and white patterns, and her eyes wandered around the Yaokai Holy Land. Fairy sister, will you leave again after you return to Yaokai this time? Not far from Yao Meng, a girl with a very pure appearance looked up at her, with unconcealed admiration in her eyes. Yao Xian used to have a bad relationship with the Yaokai Holy Maiden. The reason was mainly because the Yaokai Holy Land was originally divided into 2 factions, and Yao Xian had been influenced by it since childhood, so naturally he didn't have much affection for Fairy Yao Yu. With the return of the Green Emperor this time, there will no longer be the so-called 2 factions in the Yaokai Holy Land. After all, if the Green Emperor comes back to take charge, both sides will naturally have no objections, even Yao Xian. Yao Xian, don't be rude, the elder on the side gently scolded, then looked at the fairy in green skirt, raised his hand and bowed, saying, sorry, Yao Xian used to be spoiled in Yaokai, so she may lack some etiquette, but she is definitely not disrespectful to Senior Kingdi. Yao Meng glanced at Yao Xian and smiled lightly, you can call me whatever you want, you don't have to mind. It's better to say that compared to Senior Kingdi, Fairy Sisters sounds more comfortable. It reminds her of Musian, he also called her that. This one of the few female emperors in Dongzhou slightly restrained her thoughts and continued, I went to Yaokai this time to deal with some internal affairs. In a few days, I will return to Lianji sect to watch the Ascension Conference. The elders who were traveling with him looked at each other, and then someone mustered up the courage to raise his hand and bowed, Senior Kingdi, if you need resources to condense spiritual energy, we can ask people to prepare in advance. Not to say that your cauldron can be fully restored, but at least it can be restored to most of it. In fact, it may not be necessary to go to Lianji section. The Yaokai Holy Land is one of the top forces in Dongzhou. They don't know what the current situation of Fairy Yaomeng's cauldron is, but if they really need resources to replenish the spiritual energy lost in the cauldron, they can still prepare a lot of natural materials and treasures. Yao Meng shook his head lightly and looked at everyone meaningfully. Absorbing spiritual energy is only one aspect. Compared with this, there are other more important things that I need to deal with. Now that Yao Meng's cauldron is condensed, his physical body has long been condensed, but a strong man in the Hedeo realm, his cauldron is naturally incomparably huge. If she wanted, Yao Meng could also transform most of the mixed spiritual energy in Dongzhou into pure spiritual energy and absorb it into her own cauldron, but in this way, the spiritual energy in Dongzhou would be thin for a long time, and the future cultivation speed of most of the cultivators in Dongzhou would also be greatly hindered. Yao Meng now does not pursue her own strength too much. Besides, if she absorbs the spiritual energy to fullness too early, she will also have fewer excuses. Could she tell him in the future, my current state has been fully recovered, but I still want to stay in your natural furnace? Saying this is always easy to cause some unnecessary misunderstandings. Maybe that guy will think she is a woman with unsatisfied desires. Thinking of this, Yao Meng smiled and shook his head, and asked casually, how is the Tiandan phoenix fruit? The Tiandan phoenix tree produced 3 more fruits. My original plan was to reward 2 of them to the 2 top talents of Yaokai, and keep the third one for the time being. Yaokai Queen Mother replied respectfully. The Tiandan phoenix fruit can save the lives of others at critical moments. Even the dead can be reborn in an instant. It is also very beneficial for future cultivation. It is most suitable for the geniuses in the clan who are training outside. Yao Meng pondered for a moment and said, I need another Tiandan phoenix fruit, which will be of great use later. Yao Xian's eyes turned and looked at Yao Meng and said, is it for Muzian? Yao Meng smiled and nodded. Refining the spirit and returning to the void, this bottleneck has stuck too many people, and this Tiandan phoenix fruit, even if it can't help Muzian directly break through the return to the void realm in the future, can also increase his chances of breaking through the return to the void realm by 20% to 30%. And most importantly, the Tiandan phoenix fruit can also save Muzian's life when he is seriously injured. Friend Mu has done a great favor to my Yaokai Holy Land, and this is what I should do. Yaokai Queen Mother nodded slightly and agreed very straightforwardly. According to the time, Yao Yu and Muzian should have entered the martial world, right? I wonder how they are doing, Yao Xian suddenly said. She is still young and will participate in the next Ascension Conference, but she will not be able to participate in this Ascension Conference. Yao Yu has a very high talent, and the assessment of the martial world is not difficult for her. Yao Meng slightly tilted her head and looked in the direction of the martial world. As for him, there is no problem at all. Muzian doesn't talk about his own strength. He knows a lot of people in the section. As long as he is not too unlucky and assigned to the same area with some people with very bad relationships, it is not difficult to pass the martial world assessment and get the qualification for the Ascension Conference. Logically speaking, it should be like this. Yao Meng seemed to have noticed something. The originally casual eyes gradually became solemn, and the blue eyes seemed to penetrate the Yaokai and reach the direction of the martial world. In the martial world in the extreme winter, a dark fog can be vaguely seen. The black fog is quite similar to the secret technique of the southern wilderness, which can block the secrets of heaven. Senior Kingdi, what's wrong? An elder asked bravely. Yao Meng did not answer, but after a brief gaze, this fairy, who had always been gentle and indifferent, could not help but feel a bit colder in her beautiful eyes at this moment, and her body exuded a faint aura of terror. His breath was gone. The martial world is divided into 9 areas, arranged in order from number 1 to number 9. After everyone drew lots to determine their respective areas, everyone poured into the martial arts world. Some monks had some friction with each other in the past, so a big war broke out as soon as they entered the martial arts world. Many monks were more rational. They did not take action after entering the martial arts world, but evacuated the scene immediately, planning to take action at the right time to gain points. After all, any area in the martial arts world is quite large, so it is not difficult to find a hiding place. Boom! In the number 4 area, a strange black mist emitted from Nagiati's body. He punched a monk in the chest. The monk spurted blood from his mouth and took a few steps back. Before the monk could get up, Nagiati stepped on the opponent's chest and grinned, "Hand over the points." Looking at the extra points in his token, Nagiati couldn't help but sneer. The monks in Dongzhou seemed to be much the same as those in southern wasteland. They really wasted such a rich land. Next, let's meet up with the lady early. By the way, let's take a look at which area that guy Musian is hiding. Thinking of the humiliation when he faced Musian that day, the holy son of Nanhuang couldn't help but have a bit of monstrous anger in his eyes, and his fists were quietly clenched. "I hope you don't bump into me so soon, otherwise this trial won't be interesting." Rather than meet Musian now, Nagiati hopes to appear when Musian is about to collect all the points and pass the martial arts assessment, and then crush Musian's hopes. Only the despair brought about by this can make up for the humiliation of that day. Area number 1. A golden blade of light bloomed quietly behind Bairuoxi's back. She raised her hand to seal the secret, and the blade of light quietly split into 3. A terrifying aura filled the air from the sharp blade of light, causing the monks to avoid it one after another. When you see this scene, you know that this beauty is a very difficult girl to deal with, and no one wants to fight her so soon. What is more important right now is to get enough points and pass the martial arts assessment to qualify for the Immortal Ascension Conference. As for Bairuoxi, if he wants to fight her, it's not too late to wait until he passes the martial arts assessment before considering it. Bairuoxi looked around, and after confirming that no one was hostile to her, she planned to leave with her sword and find a suitable place to stay first. "Sister Ruoxi." At this time, a soft and melodious voice suddenly came from behind, and Bairuoxi subconsciously turned her head to look. Wearing a purple dress, a girl with a slim figure and a fresh and elegant temperament was standing not far in front, looking at her with a pair of bright and moving eyes. "Sister Lingxian," Bairuoxi asked subconsciously. Appearing in the field of vision was Ye Lingxian, who happened to be assigned to the same area as Bairuoxi this time. "I didn't expect it to be such a coincidence that we were assigned together." Bairuoxi looked at Ye Lingxian, who was approaching, and said softly. Ye Lingxian looked around and immediately said, "It seems that Brother Mu is not assigned to the same area as us. After all, they are randomly assigned according to the drawing of lots, but I believe that with his strength, except for a few people in the same realm, he can handle everyone else," Bairuoxi said. Ye Lingxian nodded slightly, and then said, "That's what I said, but it's better to find Brother Mu and Chiener as soon as possible and join them. It would be terrible if Brother Mu encounters any trouble in the martial arts world." Bairuoxi stared at Ye Lingxian tenderly, and said softly, "Sister Lingxian really likes Mu Lang. She seemed to be wary of him in the past." Ye Lingxian looked up at the densely packed monks walking in the air with swords, and said softly, "In the past, when Chiener and I were still in the Qi training realm, Brother Mu tried his best to help us with many things. So now it's my turn." She turned her head to look at Bairuoxi and stretched out her little hand. "Let's cooperate temporarily in the martial arts world, Sister Ruoxi. Of course, I won't show any mercy at the Immortal Ascension Conference." When she finished speaking, Ye Lingxian looked up at Bairuoxi, with a bit of confidence in herself in her eyes. Bairuoxi puffed out her big and plump breasts, smiled and stretched out her hand to hold Ye Lingxuan's little hand, with a condescending look like a palace overlooking a concubine, and said softly, "Sister Lingxian seems to be a lot more confident in herself since she came back from the restricted area. However, if you lose then, don't cry." In this Ascension Conference, several protagonists have already acquiesced to the hidden rewards of the sect master, and whoever wins will determine their future status. If she wins in the end, and then gets intimate with Mu Lang in front of them, who knows what the expression of Ye Lingxian, who is as arrogant as her, will be, Bairuoxi thought quietly in her heart. At the same time, similar dramas are being staged in several areas. Some have enmity with each other and plan to defeat each other openly in the Ascension Conference, while some simply want to compete for the Holy Grail. Caused by the war. The so-called Holy Grail naturally refers to Musian, who possesses the natural furnace. In this martial world where each area is extremely lively, there is an area that is so quiet that there is no sound at all. At least now Musian can't hear any sound. The only thing he can hear is the words of the woman who is suspected to be the original witch. The peach trees on both sides sway in the wind, and the pink petals sway gently. At the end of the path, a woman in a black robe stood there, and her eyes hidden under the hood looked at him gently. "Are you the original witch?" Musian asked with some uncertainty. The original witch, the master of the world. See, in the past, no one has ever seen her true face, because this woman always wears a black hood, and the Hedeo realm has the ability to make people forget their appearance immediately after seeing it once, so people in later generations only remember her features, but never remember her face. And such an existence actually appeared alive in the martial world at this moment. She raised her head and showed a very beautiful smile. "This is not a place to talk, come with me. Let's go to another place and talk slowly." With many years of experience walking among flowers, Musian inexplicably felt that the breath emanating from this mysterious woman seemed a little dangerous. After hesitating for a moment, he smiled and said, "Why don't we talk here? There's no one here anyway, right?" The woman in black robe shook her head gently. "It will be discovered soon here. After all, it's just a little trick to isolate the space." Before Musian spoke, she appeared behind Musian the next moment, and her slender jade hand rested on Musian's shoulder, saying softly, "Besides, we haven't been alone like this for a long time, and I also want to have a good chat with you. Or are you not interested?" She tilted her head slightly, and Musian saw that the pair of bright black eyes like pearls seemed to reveal an inexplicable depth. There is something wrong with this woman. Musian's heart trembled, and he smiled. How could it be? I am also very interested. But why do you sound like you have been waiting for me? We should not have met before. Musian changed his tone, with a bit of sincerity in his tone, and asked curiously. Why? The original witch tilted her head slightly and said curiously, "Didn't I tell you before? I am the one you are looking for." Musian frowned slightly, not understanding. Just when he was about to ask, the black-robed woman had raised her fingertips, and the black box in Musian's ring appeared out of thin air. It was suspended in the air and slowly opened. Under Musian's puzzled eyes, the black-robed woman whispered, "I am the reborn." Musian was stunned for a moment. She put her fingertips on the edge of her slightly white lips, and stared at Musian with moist eyes. "Well, to be precise, the reborn shown on your personal interface is me." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 276. He had just stepped into the martial world and was led to such a strange place. Musian would never have thought of it before. After all, even if someone told him that the original witch was still alive and was hiding in the martial world, Musian probably wouldn't believe it. After all, this was too unbelievable. The Ascension Conference had been held countless times from the past to the present, but no one had ever seen the original witch in the martial world. On the contrary, he had just stepped into the martial world and met the original witch. Even this original witch said that she was a reborn person, and knew about the personal interface. After hearing the words of the original witch, Musian looked at the woman in front of him with a bit of doubt. Her delicate face hidden under the black hood had a sweet smile, her fingertips rested on the moist lips that were pink and white, and she tilted her head slightly. "Are you surprised?" Musian stared at her without saying a word. The slender fingers of the original witch gently moved away from her lips and pressed against Musian's lips, smiling and saying, "Because, do you think that the personal interface is something that only you can see? Or do you think that the chaos body is obtained from other cultivators? Is this a secret?" The moment the original witch finished speaking, Musian was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes slowly widened, looking at the original witch with incredible eyes. His body seemed to have countless goosebumps. This is an effect that even the best actor cannot perform. Even if Musian wakes up and sees his reaction later, he will probably be amazed at his reaction. Because the amount of information contained in the words of the original witch is really too huge. Musian's personal interface has always been a secret. In the past, even if he opened his personal interface in front of others, others could not see it. As a result, now there is someone who knows his personal interface. The other party even knows that he is a chaos body. The original witch is the real reborn. But if the original witch is a reborn, why did the title of reborn appear on the personal interface when Sister Menro refined the bronze fragments? There should be some connection between the two. Musian's eyes flickered slightly, and his mind seemed to be in a mess. After a brief moment of unconsciousness, he suppressed his inner surprise, tried to maintain his natural demeanor, and smiled. "What are you talking about? Why don't I understand?" When he said this, his eyes were fixed on the original witch, hoping to get the truth he wanted from her. However, the original witch seemed to be well versed in the beauty of fragments. She raised her head slightly, with a playful smile, and said softly, "This is not a place to talk, let's go to another place and talk slowly." As if the witch was bewitching her believers, the gentle and graceful voice came softly in Musian's ears, making people feel lost in the magic. For the protagonists of this Ascension Conference, the real important thing is not the 3 imperial-level medicinal herbs, but the hidden reward of Musian. But no one would have thought that this reward would be taken away when the Ascension Conference had just officially begun. If there was a painter at this moment, and the original witch asked him to draw a picture of the protagonist of Destiny taking the martial world assessment, then the painter could draw it in the simplest way. He just needs to draw according to the 2 people on the scene. Chiu Shui's bright and gentle gaze at Musian's original witch, and Musian's stunned look of shocking my mother for a whole year. As for the protagonist of Destiny, they are taking the martial world assessment. The original witch slowly raised her head, and the gentle eyes hidden under the black hood stared at Musian, and at that moment, he seemed to have a feeling that his eyes were attracted to her involuntarily. Musian's eyes were slightly dazed, staring at the eyes of the original witch. I seem to have seen her somewhere before. For some reason, Musian suddenly felt a sense of déjà vu. He had seen the original witch before. But where exactly? Looking at the eyes of the original witch, Musian's eyes gradually became dazed, and he felt that everything around him seemed to have gradually appeared double, and it seemed that only the original witch was left in his eyes. At this time, Musian suddenly felt a slight electric current on his fingers, which also made him suddenly startled and returned to reality from his previous thoughts. The spirit in the purple lightning holy ring is awakening its owner. Musian suddenly came to his senses and bit the tip of his tongue lightly to calm himself down as much as possible. This original witch is a bit weird. Like the queen of the demon world, she can bewitch people. I have to calm down. Think about the jade feet of Fairy Yao Mang, the long legs of Sister Menro, the breasts of Ruoxi that look down on other women, the fair skin of Sister Ling Xian and Sister Qian Er, and the top sisters of Senior Sister and Sister Fei Ying. Miss Ling Long and Sister Zhangju are actually a good match. Musian's eyes gradually became clear, and when he looked at this mysterious woman, there was a little more vigilance in his eyes. Let's go, he agreed very straightforwardly. If the other party is really the original witch, he can't escape even if he wants to. If the other party had ill intentions towards him, he could have taken action long ago, and he wouldn't have waited until now. Of course, if he refused, the other party might just turn against him. At this time, the original witch stared at Musian quietly, stayed on his handsome face for a moment, and then showed a sweet and charming smile. You were thinking about other girls just now, right? She can hear other people's voices. Musian's heart trembled. The original witch smiled, but it doesn't matter, as long as it's you, I will tolerate whatever you do. After all, even if everyone's love is added together, it can't match my love alone. She raised her fingertips, and the mysterious black box suspended in the air opened silently. Dongtian, Musian said subconsciously. There was actually a cave in the black box, which directly sucked the original witch into it, and also sucked Musian into the black box. Musian used to wonder why the original witch left a black box, just to show her love to someone and say hello to him. The answer is no. Just like Musian's 8 desolate dream map, the black box left by the original witch is a cave in itself. Boom! With a loud bang, Wei Mengru blasted out with a sword, and the terrifying golden light covered almost half of the area, and all the cultivators avoided it. The young man who stood in front of her before was not so lucky. The power of the sword made the young cultivator retreat several steps. He coughed up blood, covered his chest, raised his head and looked at Wei Mengru with fear in his eyes. Not far away, a group of cultivators did not expect this result. At this moment, looking at this scene, there was a little more horror in their eyes. Unexpectedly, the third son of the Hong family in Dongzhou was defeated by this female cultivator with a sword. It has only been half an hour since the cultivators entered the martial world. Some smarter cultivators naturally chose to wait and see. In addition, there are naturally some people who were praised as geniuses in their families in the past. Because of their self-confidence, they naturally want to get points as soon as possible to pass the martial world assessment and become the first to pass the martial world. Of course, the third son of the Hong family in front of him was not actually because he was attracted by Wei Mengru's points, but he had never seen such a beautiful woman in his family in the past, so he proposed a request for cooperation. It was called cooperation, but in fact it was just an opportunity to contact Wei Mengru. Such a request was naturally rejected by the maid, and after that, the third son of the Hong family wanted to force him to stay, which turned into the current scene. However, no one expected that this seemingly cold and beautiful beauty was so strong, and she was very decisive. She defeated the third son of the Hong family with one sword and forcibly obtained some of his points. Wei Mengru glanced at the cultivators around her, and after realizing that they had no intention of taking action, she flew away on her sword. Compared to getting points as soon as possible to pass the assessment of the martial world, what is more important to her is her young master. In the past, she always protected her young master. This time, they were assigned to different areas in the martial world. Although she believed in her young master's strength, she was still a little worried. Just thinking about this, Wei Mengru raised her hand and made a gesture, flying in the air on her sword, looking for the exit connecting this area. The 9 areas of the martial world are connected to each other, but every time you step into the exit of that area, you will only randomly come to an unfixed area. In addition, the area of the martial world is extremely vast, so whether you can find Musian depends more on luck. And it happened that the maid was still very confident in her luck. There were cultivators flying swords around her one after another, and Wei Mengru flew towards the end of this area in the cold wind mixed with goose feathers and heavy snow. The monks around gradually noticed Wei Mengru's presence, but because the maid's action just now shocked many people, most of the monks did not dare to approach her or even try to get points from her. Miss Wei. At this time, a surprised voice suddenly came from behind. Wei Mengru subconsciously turned her head and looked over. What came into view was a beautiful woman in a blue dress. She was standing in the heavy snow in the winter, stepping on a flying sword, and her eyes were fixed on the direction where Wei Mengru was. It was the saint of the world sea, Tang Sufei, who had contact with them before. What a coincidence, I didn't expect that you and I were assigned to the same area. Tang Sufei smiled and flew over on the sword and took the initiative to greet. Wei Mengru nodded slightly. It's a coincidence. Tang Sufei seemed to have long been accustomed to Wei Mengru's indifference. She smiled indifferently and said, "Are you looking for Master Mu? If you don't mind, let's go together for now. You have also seen that some of the cultivators who entered the martial world this time have secretly cooperated. If you are alone, you may be attacked by a group." Tang Sufei took the initiative to invite. "It just so happens that I also want to ask Master Mu about the black box that day," Tang Sufei continued. Black box, Wei Mengru's eyes flickered slightly, as if she remembered something. Then, she nodded gently and accepted Tang Sufei's invitation. Although the maid was cold and arrogant, she also knew that it was better to cooperate with others in such a place, which could also avoid some unnecessary troubles. The two of them stood on their swords, facing the wind and snow, looking for exits from other areas. Tang Sufei glanced at Wei Mengru casually, and suddenly said, "I don't know if I can ask you something. I have always been a little concerned about it before." Wei Mengru looked forward. "Just ask. Why is Miss Wei willing to be Mr. Mu's maid? I don't think Mr. Mu is incompetent, but it's a little strange. With Miss Wei's strength, even the Lianji sect probably values her very much. Why would she be someone else's maid?" When Tang Sufei said this, the speed of flying on the sword also slowed down a lot, and her eyes were always focused on Wei Mengru. Wei Mengru's flying speed slowed down a little, staring at the flying snow in front of her, and said calmly, "He is much more powerful than you think." Besides, Wei Mengru paused and continued, "He said he was a maid, but he never forced me to do anything." Tang Sufei looked at Wei Mengru meaningfully, and suddenly smiled. "Miss Wei likes Mr. Mu." Wei Mengru glanced at the smiling saint of the world sea and said, "The saint of the world sea is interested in love." She paused and said lightly, "I don't like that kind of fickle people can't bring up any interest." Tang Sufei knew that Wei Mengru didn't want to dwell on this topic, so she just glanced at Wei Mengru's slightly frowned eyebrows casually, with a faint smile on her lips, and said, "If Miss Wei wins this Ascension Conference, what do you plan to do with the 3 Emperor-level medicinal herbs?" Wei Mengru seemed to have thought of something, and her lips slightly raised. "Let's talk about it if she wins. I still have a lot of things I want him to do." Muzian thought that asking Wei Mengru for help was the safest way. In fact, Wei Mengru did help him a lot in the past. But even Muzian probably wouldn't have thought that the maid would want to turn over and become the master. He? Tang Sufei tilted her head slightly, and countless question marks appeared on her head. But Wei Mengru didn't explain, so Tang Sufei naturally didn't continue to ask. The two flew along the end of this area, and unknowingly, Wei Mengru seemed to have noticed something, and her eyes fell on a piece of black fog not far ahead. This black fog is a bit like the secret art of the southern wilderness. It seems to be blocking the secrets of heaven. Tang Sufei frowned slightly. But why would the black fog of the secret art of the southern wilderness appear in the martial world? Wei Mengru's eyes moved slightly, and she stared silently at the black fog in front of her. There was a very familiar feeling in this black fog. After a brief hesitation, Wei Mengru subconsciously placed her slender hand on the bronze fragment on her chest, and then she flew towards the direction of the black fog with her sword. Tang Sufei hesitated slightly, and then followed. When they entered the black fog, they saw the origin of the black fog. It was a black object suspended in the air, wrapped in black fog, blocking the secrets of heaven, and even couldn't see what it looked like. However, after a brief gaze, the two of them had the same thought in their minds. Black box. Musian looked at the huge palace and the black-robed woman who was walking towards the throne in black boots. I didn't expect that there would be such a huge cave in the black box. The means of the powerful people in the Hedeo realm are really unimaginable. Musian sighed in his heart from the bottom of his heart. Although he has seen several Hedeo realm beings so far, some of them are responsible for acting cute and eating, and some are mysterious and have never taken action. There are also some because he robbed his daughter. If possible, it is better to pray that the other party will not take action. The only Hedeo realm strongman who has taken action is Yao Meng, and at that time Yao Meng was just a wisp of spiritual consciousness, and the spiritual energy in his body was plundered from him. Now that Yao Meng has recovered, there is no chance to take action. After all, who would have nothing to do to offend a Hedeo realm? Therefore, this method of compressing the cave in a small black box is the first time that Musian has seen it. Soon, Musian's attention fell on the original witch. Although her face could not be seen clearly, it was not difficult to tell from her exquisite figure that she must be a top-notch beauty. However, the tight black robe wrapped around her delicate body also added a bit of mystery to her. If it were usual, Musian would probably have a strong interest in this mystery and even actively pursue her, but now, in such an environment, he was more wary of the original witch. The original witch sat in front of the throne, staring at Musian in the audience, with a sweet smile on her face. I can finally chat here with peace of mind. From what you said, there was someone in the martial world eavesdropping on our conversation just now, Musian asked casually, actually to get the question. Of course. The answer of the original witch made Musian slightly stunned. Only in this black fog that blocks the secrets of heaven can you not worry about being eavesdropped. When she said this, she looked at Musian with a slightly gentle look and said, "Come up and sit down, I won't hurt you." Musian said in a joking tone, "You and I have never met before, and this kind of word seems to only deceive young boys who are not very experienced in the world." The original witch tilted her head slightly and asked curiously, "Don't you believe me?" Musian also tilted his head and stared at the original witch. "Do you know about my personal interface and even the chaotic body? What this means is that you should explain the matter clearly first and then I will consider whether to believe you." The original witch smiled. "Of course I know. Because your personal interface is given to you by me. So, they were the protagonists all along." Author, CCC. Chapter 277. Can the personal interface be given to other people? When Musian heard the words of the original witch, the first word that came to his mind was absurd. But the other party even knew the personal interface. Even if this thing was really given by her, it is actually not impossible. But the problem is, even if it is assumed that what the original witch said is true, if the personal interface is really given by the original witch, what exactly does she want to do? Musian looked up at the black-robed woman not far ahead and said, "Since you are willing to tell me this, you should have guessed what I would ask you, right?" Of course the original witch tilted her head slightly and stared at Musian with a smile. "I would find it strange if you didn't ask me." Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "Why did you leave the personal interface to me?" "Because I have always loved you, no matter how much time has passed, no matter what happened, I will always love you," the original witch said naturally in a very calm and gentle tone, as if she was talking about something ordinary. "When have we met?" Musian asked subconsciously. He thought to himself that if there was really a beautiful woman who liked him, how could he have no impression of her at all? Or did the original witch recognize the wrong person? "I didn't recognize the wrong person. You are the one I am looking for." The original witch seemed to guess what Musian was thinking and answered immediately. Her tone suddenly became much lower, so that Musian once thought that he had done something wrong and felt a little ashamed in his heart. He was silent for a moment and said, "How did you give me the personal interface?" "It has the ability to transfer to other people, but it depends on whether the person is willing or not," the original witch said. Under Musian's surprised eyes, she gently lifted the hood on her head, revealing a beautiful face, and her silver white hair gently rested on her shoulders, but the most unforgettable thing was her pair of pitiful eyes, which gave people a feeling of weakness at first sight. She said calmly, "I am both a reborn person and a time traveler. The personal interface you mentioned was originally my golden finger. I know very well how to transfer it to others." "Time traveler? And a reborn person? What is the origin of this original witch?" Musian suppressed the throbbing in his heart and said, "Since you are a time traveler, it seems that you are not originally from Juzhu. Juzhu is very big, but it is just one part of the star field." The corner of the original witch's mouth was slightly raised, outlining a very beautiful arc. She raised her fingertips, and Musian appeared beside her the next moment. The original witch raised her hand and gently stroked Musian's face, with a bit of nostalgia in her eyes. Then, she stretched out her hands, as if she was hugging a newborn, and gently embraced Musian in her arms, and then pressed him in her arms. A special and refreshing fragrance gently floated into the nose, and the soft touch still made people's heart beat even through a layer of clothes. If it were usual, Musian might enjoy such a soft embrace more, but at this moment, when he smelled the special fragrance of the original witch, he subconsciously closed his eyes. For some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of nostalgia. "I have smelled a similar fragrance somewhere, and it was just recently." Such a thought flashed through Musian's mind. The original witch lowered her head and gazed at the boy gently. She stretched out her fingertips and gently combed Musian's hair. She looked up and looked into the distance, and whispered, "In the star field I just mentioned, there is the blue planet you are familiar with. In fact, there are 2 or 3 ancestors of the ancient forces in Juzhu who may have been time travelers in the past. The place where they used to live has entered the period of the end of spiritual energy, so they brought their people to Juzhu. And I came to Juzhu for this reason. So in Juzhu, time travelers are not very rare creatures, at least I am not the first one." Musian hesitated slightly, raised his head and said, "Since the personal interface is your golden finger, why do you want to give it to me? It is useless to me, but it is very useful to you. You should have gained a lot of benefits from it in the past, right?" The original witch smiled. Musian was silent. There are now more than 10 title bonuses in this human interface, each of which has brought him a considerable increase, and also made Musian the first and rarest chaotic body. But if the personal interface is really given by the original witch, then what is her purpose? "Why do you help me like this?" Musian suddenly asked, even though he had guessed the answer. "I have always loved you," the original witch said as if it was a matter of course. "Although I know that I am indeed very handsome, it is impossible to fall in love at first sight." Musian looked up at her. "Why? I don't know." However, this time, the answer of the original witch made Musian stunned. "Now I can't even be called a remnant soul, and I don't remember why I like you," the original witch said softly. The original witch now has no feelings. The reason why she likes Musian is because she still has the obsession to like Musian, but she can't explain why she likes him. Musian seemed to have noticed her depression, so he remained silent. In this silence, the original witch continued in a very calm tone, "But there is a voice in my heart that keeps reminding me that the person I love is you. So, I will always love you like this, and then wait until the day I am truly reborn, and we can be together forever." She hugged Musian with a sweet smile on her face, as if she was already imagining all kinds of things in the future. "Can my natural furnace help you?" Musian suddenly asked. "The natural furnace is only effective for spiritual consciousness. What I left in the martial world is just my obsession. Even if I enter your natural furnace, it will disappear later." The original witch shook her head slowly. Hearing this, Musian couldn't help but feel a little more regretful. In the past, Yao Meng was able to stay in his natural furnace because she still retained a trace of spiritual consciousness, but the original witch who appeared in front of him at this moment was just an obsession. And the reason why this obsession still remains after 10,000 years is because of him. If what the original witch said is true, doesn't it mean that he knew her a long time ago? When thinking of this, in addition to the absurd feeling of I actually had a wife a long time ago, Musian also felt a little more pity for this obsessive black-robed beauty. Although he didn't know how the original witch knew him 10,000 years ago, and didn't know why she had such a deep obsession with him, this love still made people feel very emotional. He looked up at the original witch and whispered, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" The original witch looked at Musian with a smile, "Can you please stay here with me?" "Is this also the request left by your obsession?" Musian asked. The original witch shook her head slowly. "I just think you are very kind, and I feel very safe when I am with you, so I want you to accompany me." Musian looked into her eyes, and there was a hint of moisture in her gentle eyes, which looked pitiful, and his figure was reflected in her eyes. What a powerful person! Everything was wiped out by the years, leaving one obsession after another, and he didn't even remember what happened in the past, but just kept reminding himself, "I will always love him." "You are really powerful," Musian sighed from the bottom of his heart. The original witch tilted her head slightly and looked at him in confusion. "But I can't stay here with you," Musian continued. He stared at the eyes of the original witch, trying to see negative emotions such as anger in her eyes, but she still kept smiling, but there was a little more disappointment in her eyes. "Because you want to find other girls," the original witch looked at him gently. "If I say yes, what will you do?" Musian jumped back and forth on the edge of the small dark room where he was locked up. The original witch smiled and said, "If you don't want to stay here with me, then I can send you out. But I still hope you can stay and chat with me. After all, this obsession will probably disappear in a while, and I don't know when we will meet next time." When the original witch said this, she became quiet again. There seemed to be a sound of chains in the black fog behind her, as if she was ready to move. It was just because of some special secret method that Musian did not hear the sound of the chains, and even could not see the mysterious black fog around the original witch. He thought the original witch was a gentle and obedient girl, but in fact, he did not realize that he had walked on the edge of the small black room. "Let's go out and relax." Musian suddenly looked up at the black-robed beauty in front of him. It must be said that although her dress was low-key, her silver-white hair was really too conspicuous. It was no wonder that she always wore a black hood in the past, probably to cover up this conspicuous hair. "Go out and relax." The chain behind the original witch, which was about to sneak out, paused slightly, and she subconsciously looked up at Musian. "Are you saying that you want me to leave here with you?" the original witch asked. "We just need to leave the black box. It's better to relax outside than to sit here," Musian said. The original witch tilted her head slightly and said, "Is it okay? If I remember correctly, you came to the martial world this time for the Ascension Conference, right? If you don't get enough points, you may miss the Ascension Conference. The martial world assessment is very important, but if it's really too late, just give up." Under the gaze of the original witch, Musian smiled freely. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice something for something, at least this sacrifice is worth it in my opinion." Outside the black box, the black fog has almost covered half of the area. Wei Mengru and Tang Sufei are walking towards the depths of the black box together. However, it seems that no one except Musian can open the black box. Not even Wei Mengru can do it. They can only watch from the outside as the black box emits the black fog that blocks the secrets of heaven, but they don't know how to get close to it. "Why does the black box stored in Master Mu's place appear here?" Tang Sufei frowned slightly, looking at the mysterious black box emitting thick black mist, and couldn't help but mutter to herself. Wei Mengru also frowned, with some doubts and confusion in her eyes. Boom! At this time, The black mist in the black box suddenly rushed into the sky, and this strange scene naturally attracted the attention of the two. "Look, there seems to be a person in the black box," Tang Sufei suddenly whispered, staring at the black mist that was rising into the sky, and the vaguely visible figure in the black mist. Such black mist was extremely thick, almost rising into the sky, and it also made the monks in other areas notice it, and they couldn't help but turn their heads to look in that direction subconsciously. Wei Mengru's eyes followed the trend, and then, her eyes slightly solidified on the two figures in the black mist. And one of the figures was Musian. Why is he here? And who is the person next to him? Wei Mengru's eyes subconsciously fell on the woman in black robes beside Musian. She frowned slightly, and somehow she felt familiar. Tang Sufei, who was standing by, also stared at the black-robed woman in the air. At this moment, the black-robed woman in the air seemed to have noticed their gazes and turned her head slightly to look over. It was just a casual glance, but after a brief hesitation, Tang Sufei felt an indescribable excitement in her heart, and almost lost her voice and said, "Original witch." Wei Mengru's eyes were also fixed on the figure in the air, but they happened to meet the eyes of the original witch. The original witch stared at Wei Mengru silently, as if she saw something in her eyes, and her eyes became more complicated. "It's you," she whispered to herself. The original witch quickly gathered her thoughts, tilted her head slightly, and showed a charming smile. "Let's go. I am very familiar with the martial world, let me guide you." The black fog enveloped the two of them, and Musian naturally could not perceive the fluctuations of spiritual energy in the outside world. He nodded slightly and was about to say something. However, before he could speak, he suddenly heard a soft and pleasant voice coming from beside him. "I am also very familiar with the martial world. If you just want to take a walk, I can lead the way. But, is your martial world assessment okay?" Yao Meng." Almost at the moment when the voice sounded, Musian subconsciously looked up and saw a ray of green light silently lit up, and then swallowed the black fog. The green dress fluttered with the cold wind, and the graceful jade feet floated in the air. She stared at the original witch with a smile in her eyes. "I can't believe that the original witch is still alive." The original witch narrowed her beautiful eyes slightly. "Kingdi. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 278. Can the personal interface be given to other people? When Musian heard the words of the original witch, the first word that came to his mind was absurd. But the other party even knew the personal interface. Even if this thing was really given by her, it is actually not impossible. But the problem is, even if it is assumed that what the original witch said is true, if the personal interface is really given by the original witch, what exactly does she want to do? Musian looked up at the black-robed woman not far ahead and said, "Since you are willing to tell me this, you should have guessed what I would ask you, right?" Of course the original witch tilted her head slightly and stared at Musian with a smile. "I would find it strange if you didn't ask me." Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "Why did you leave the personal interface to me?" "Because I have always loved you, no matter how much time has passed, no matter what happened, I will always love you," the original witch said naturally in a very calm and gentle tone, as if she was talking about something ordinary. "When have we met?" Musian asked subconsciously. He thought to himself that if there was really a beautiful woman who liked him, how could he have no impression of her at all? Or did the original witch recognize the wrong person? "I didn't recognize the wrong person. You are the one I am looking for." The original witch seemed to guess what Musian was thinking and answered immediately. Her tone suddenly became much lower, so that Musian once thought that he had done something wrong and felt a little ashamed in his heart. He was silent for a moment and said, How did you give me the personal interface? It has the ability to transfer to other people, but it depends on whether the person is willing or not, the original witch said. Under Musian's surprised eyes, she gently lifted the hood on her head, revealing a beautiful face, and her silver white hair gently rested on her shoulders, but the most unforgettable thing was her pair of pitiful eyes, which gave people a feeling of weakness at first sight. She said calmly, I am both a reborn person and a time traveler. The personal interface you mentioned was originally my golden finger. I know very well how to transfer it to others. Time traveler? And a reborn person? What is the origin of this original witch? Musian suppressed the throbbing in his heart and said, since you are a time traveler, it seems that you are not originally from Juzhu. Juzhu is very big, but it is just one part of the star field. The corner of the original witch's mouth was slightly raised, outlining a very beautiful arc. She raised her fingertips, and Musian appeared beside her the next moment. The original witch raised her hand and gently stroked Musian's face, with a bit of nostalgia in her eyes. Then, she stretched out her hands, as if she was hugging a newborn, and gently embraced Musian in her arms, and then pressed him in her arms. A special and refreshing fragrance gently floated into the nose, and the soft touch still made people's heart beat even through a layer of clothes. If it were usual, Musian might enjoy such a soft embrace more, but at this moment, when he smelled the special fragrance of the original witch, he subconsciously closed his eyes. For some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of nostalgia. I have smelled a similar fragrance somewhere, and it was just recently. Such a thought flashed through Musian's mind. The original witch lowered her head and gazed at the boy gently. She stretched out her fingertips and gently combed Musian's hair. She looked up and looked into the distance, and whispered, in the star field I just mentioned, there is the blue planet you are familiar with. In fact, there are 2 or 3 ancestors of the ancient forces in Juzhu who may have been time travelers in the past. The place where they used to live has entered the period of the end of spiritual energy, so they brought their people to Juzhu. And I came to Juzhu for this reason. So in Juzhu, time travelers are not very rare creatures, at least I am not the first one. Musian hesitated slightly, raised his head and said, since the personal interface is your golden finger, why do you want to give it to me? It is useless to me, but it is very useful to you. You should have gained a lot of benefits from it in the past, right? The original witch smiled. Musian was silent. There are now more than 10 title bonuses in this human interface, each of which has brought him a considerable increase, and also made Musian the first and rarest chaotic body. But if the personal interface is really given by the original witch, then what is her purpose? Why do you help me like this? Musian suddenly asked, even though he had guessed the answer. I have always loved you, the original witch said as if it was a matter of course. Although I know that I am indeed very handsome, it is impossible to fall in love at first sight. Musian looked up at her. Why? I don't know. However, this time, the answer of the original witch made Musian stunned. Now I can't even be called a remnant soul, and I don't remember why I like you, the original witch said softly. The original witch now has no feelings. The reason why she likes Musian is because she still has the obsession to like Musian, but she can't explain why she likes him. Musian seemed to have noticed her depression, so he remained silent. In this silence, the original witch continued in a very calm tone, but there is a voice in my heart that keeps reminding me that the person I love is you. So, I will always love you like this, and then wait until the day I am truly reborn, and we can be together forever. She hugged Musian with a sweet smile on her face, as if she was already imagining all kinds of things in the future. Can my natural furnace help you? Musian suddenly asked. The natural furnace is only effective for spiritual consciousness. What I left in the martial world is just my obsession. Even if I enter your natural furnace, it will disappear later. The original witch shook her head slowly. Hearing this, Musian couldn't help but feel a little more regretful. In the past, Yao Meng was able to stay in his natural furnace because she still retained a trace of spiritual consciousness, but the original witch who appeared in front of him at this moment was just an obsession. And the reason why this obsession still remains after 10,000 years is because of him. If what the original witch said is true, doesn't it mean that he knew her a long time ago? When thinking of this, in addition to the absurd feeling of I actually had a wife a long time ago, Musian also felt a little more pity for this obsessive black-robed beauty. Although he didn't know how the original witch knew him 10,000 years ago, and didn't know why she had such a deep obsession with him, this love still made people feel very emotional. He looked up at the original witch and whispered, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" The original witch looked at Musian with a smile, "Can you please stay here with me?" "Is this also the request left by your obsession?" Musian asked. The original witch shook her head slowly. "I just think you are very kind, and I feel very safe when I am with you, so I want you to accompany me." Musian looked into her eyes, and there was a hint of moisture in her gentle eyes, which looked pitiful, and his figure was reflected in her eyes. What a powerful person! Everything was wiped out by the years, leaving one obsession after another, and he didn't even remember what happened in the past, but just kept reminding himself, "I will always love him." "You are really powerful," Musian sighed from the bottom of his heart. The original witch tilted her head slightly and looked at him in confusion. "But I can't stay here with you," Musian continued. He stared at the eyes of the original witch, trying to see negative emotions such as anger in her eyes, but she still kept smiling, but there was a little more disappointment in her eyes. "Because you want to find other girls," the original witch looked at him gently. "If I say yes, what will you do?" Musian jumped back and forth on the edge of the small dark room where he was locked up. The original witch smiled and said, "If you don't want to stay here with me, then I can send you out. But I still hope you can stay and chat with me. After all, this obsession will probably disappear in a while, and I don't know when we will meet next time." When the original witch said this, she became quiet again. There seemed to be a sound of chains in the black fog behind her, as if she was ready to move. It was just because of some special secret method that Musian did not hear the sound of the chains, and even could not see the mysterious black fog around the original witch. He thought the original witch was a gentle and obedient girl, but in fact, he did not realize that he had walked on the edge of the small black room. "Let's go out and relax." Musian suddenly looked up at the black-robed beauty in front of him. It must be said that although her dress was low-key, her silver-white hair was really too conspicuous. It was no wonder that she always wore a black hood in the past, probably to cover up this conspicuous hair. "Go out and relax." The chain behind the original witch, which was about to sneak out, paused slightly, and she subconsciously looked up at Musian. "Are you saying that you want me to leave here with you?" the original witch asked. "We just need to leave the black box. It's better to relax outside than to sit here," Musian said. The original witch tilted her head slightly and said, "Is it okay? If I remember correctly, you came to the martial world this time for the Ascension Conference, right? If you don't get enough points, you may miss the Ascension Conference. The martial world assessment is very important, but if it's really too late, just give up." Under the gaze of the original witch, Musian smiled freely. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice something for something, at least this sacrifice is worth it in my opinion." Outside the black box, the black fog has almost covered half of the area. Wei Mengru and Tang Sufei are walking towards the depths of the black box together. However, it seems that no one except Musian can open the black box. Not even Wei Mengru can do it. They can only watch from the outside as the black box emits the black fog that blocks the secrets of heaven, but they don't know how to get close to it. "Why does the black box stored in Master Mu's place appear here?" Tang Sufei frowned slightly, looking at the mysterious black box emitting thick black mist, and couldn't help but mutter to herself. Wei Mengru also frowned, with some doubts and confusion in her eyes. Boom! At this time, The black mist in the black box suddenly rushed into the sky, and this strange scene naturally attracted the attention of the two. "Look, there seems to be a person in the black box," Tang Sufei suddenly whispered, staring at the black mist that was rising into the sky, and the vaguely visible figure in the black mist. Such black mist was extremely thick, almost rising into the sky, and it also made the monks in other areas notice it, and they couldn't help but turn their heads to look in that direction subconsciously. Wei Mengru's eyes followed the trend, and then, her eyes slightly solidified on the two figures in the black mist. And one of the figures was Musian. Why is he here? And who is the person next to him? Wei Mengru's eyes subconsciously fell on the woman in black robes beside Musian. She frowned slightly, and somehow she felt familiar. Tang Sufei, who was standing by, also stared at the black-robed woman in the air. At this moment, the black-robed woman in the air seemed to have noticed their gazes and turned her head slightly to look over. It was just a casual glance, but after a brief hesitation, Tang Sufei felt an indescribable excitement in her heart, and almost lost her voice and said, "Original witch." Wei Mengru's eyes were also fixed on the figure in the air, but they happened to meet the eyes of the original witch. The original witch stared at Wei Mengru silently, as if she saw something in her eyes, and her eyes became more complicated. "It's you," she whispered to herself. The original witch quickly gathered her thoughts, tilted her head slightly, and showed a charming smile. "Let's go. I am very familiar with the martial world, let me guide you." The black fog enveloped the two of them, and Musian naturally could not perceive the fluctuations of spiritual energy in the outside world. He nodded slightly and was about to say something. However, before he could speak, he suddenly heard a soft and pleasant voice coming from beside him. "I am also very familiar with the martial world. If you just want to take a walk, I can lead the way. But, is your martial world assessment okay?" Yao Meng." Almost at the moment when the voice sounded, Musian subconsciously looked up and saw a ray of green light silently lit up, and then swallowed the black fog. The green dress fluttered with the cold wind, and the graceful jade feet floated in the air. She stared at the original witch with a smile in her eyes. "I can't believe that the original witch is still alive." The original witch narrowed her beautiful eyes slightly. "Kingdi. So, they were the protagonists all along." Author, CCC. Chapter 279. Qing Emperor. The original witch squinted her eyes and looked at the cyan figure that gradually appeared in the black mist. She was wearing a long skirt with a light cyan base and embroidered with white patterns, revealing a small section of her soft waist as the cold wind blew. The waist of the water snake is slender and elegant, and the snowy feet like rare white jade are faintly visible under the skirt. The original witch's beautiful eyebrows were slightly raised, and her bright eyes hidden under the black hood stared at Yao Meng. "If I remember correctly, I am still in the martial arts assessment," and a strong man in the Hedeo realm hastily entered the martial arts world. "Isn't that great?" Yao Meng chuckled lightly and looked at the black-robed woman with a bit of a smile. Then, his eyes fell on the original witch's delicate hand holding Musian tightly, and said, "Since there can be a Hedeo realm in the martial arts world, why can't there be two? What's more?" She paused briefly and continued, "This is just a ray of my spiritual consciousness. It is not difficult for a being in the Hedeo realm to reach the martial arts world from the Yaokai Holy Land in an instant, but if Yao Meng's true body comes, it will definitely disrupt the disciples who are currently taking assessments in the martial arts world. This is also the only time Yao Meng will meet. The reason why I came here as a clone." The original witch raised her head slightly, stared at the beauty in the green skirt with gentle eyes, and said, "Do you think you can take him away with just a ray of spiritual consciousness? Originally, I came here to take a look. If someone really wanted to force him to stay in the martial arts world, I would take action." Yao Meng glanced at the original witch and said softly, "But it seems that I don't need to do anything." The original witch in front of me is just an obsession left over thousands of years ago. This obsession represents a past wish of the original witch. And this wish is to stay with Musian. Now this wish has come true. Even if Yao Meng doesn't have to do anything, the original witch's obsession will disappear sooner or later. Take good care of him when he is in the martial arts world. When Yao Meng said this, he looked at Musian inadvertently. Why does it feel like a brother becomes a brother, and a son inherits his father's legacy? Musian's mind was filled with thoughts and he didn't know where to start. But at this moment, he suddenly felt that there seemed to be a gaze looking at him, and he looked up. Go, the fairy from the Yaokai Holy Land is looking at him with a faint smile. From an outsider's point of view, such a smile seems to be somewhat unattainable and mysterious. However, Musian knew Yao Meng well and naturally knew what such a dangerous smile meant. But now that Yao Meng has spoken, he can only remain silent. I had to bite the bullet and finish the meeting with the original witch. As for going back, let's think about it after we go back. The worst case scenario would be to sacrifice one's life to suppress Yao Meng. Of course, this is the best outcome. As for the bad outcome, this Qing emperor will live in the world for thousands of years, and no one knows what terrible punishment methods he will have. For example, ivy, bondage, small black room. While Musian was still worried about the future, on the other side, Yao Meng's spiritual consciousness had quietly dissipated. Musian calmed down a little, looked sideways at the original witch, and said, "Let's go." "Is there anywhere you want to go?" he continued. The original witch shook her head slightly and looked at him with a smile. "As long as I'm with you, I can go anywhere. No matter where I go, this obsession will only exist for a while and then disappear, so I want to stay with you as much as possible," the original witch said. Musian was silent. In fact, it is difficult for Musian to understand his feelings for the original witch, because in his knowledge, he has no memory of being with the original witch in the past. But the original witch's obsession with him was very deep, so deep that it was touching. Musian took off her hood and looked into her bright eyes, which reflected the falling snowflakes. Occasionally, there were sounds of monks clashing with each other, but Musian's attention always fell on the original witch. Obsession represents the owner's strong desire for a certain wish during his lifetime. This desire has never faded away despite the wind and sun for thousands of years. The obsession of the original witch in the martial arts world is like a small box that has been sealed for a long time. No one noticed her because the person she was waiting for never showed up. It wasn't until he appeared one day that the dusty little box was opened, and you found that she still exists here after years of exposure, and her love for you has never changed, even if she has been. I forget everything that happened in the past, but I still remind myself. I have always loved him. It would be a lie to say that Musian is unmoved. He has no other pursuits than beauty. Although this original witch seems to have a faint tendency to be a yandere of beauty, she is still exciting. However, in addition to love and affection for her, Musian also had a lot of sympathy. Or you can take me to relax. Are you familiar with the martial arts world? Musian extended his hand to the original witch. In any case, before the original witch's obsession disappears, they can still go to many places, and at least they can leave her a good memory. The original witch gently opened her black hood and smiled sweetly, "Okay." Boom. The black mist dispersed as those words fell, and the black box was quietly closed, and then fell into Musian's ring. At this time, many monks in this area were looking for a suitable place to stay, and as the black fog dispersed, the figures of the two people were clearly reflected in everyone's field of vision. "Look over there. That monk seems to be a disciple of my sect, but who is the silver-haired beauty beside him? I don't think I have seen her this time in the martial world. Isn't that natural? There are so many people entering the martial world this time. How can you have seen everyone?" a monk joked. "That's different. If such a beautiful woman is really in this area, I can't have no impression of her at all. This remark immediately caused a burst of laughter, and then their attention fell on the silver-haired beauty in the air. Although it was just a joke, it was not wrong. If such a moving beauty was really in this area, how could they not notice it at all? Waymengru stared at the figure of the black-robed woman quietly, and then couldn't help but frown slightly. The woman's breath seems to be a little bit wrong. If it was just now, Tang Sufei might tease Waymengru whether she was jealous or something, but at this moment, she didn't seem to be in such a mood. Her eyes were a little dazed, and seeing that the two were about to leave, she quickly sent a voice message, "Senior, are you the original witch?" The original witch seemed not to hear, with a faint smile on her face, and she turned her head to look at Musian from time to time. It was obvious that everyone was seriously participating in the martial arts assessment at this moment, but these two people seemed to be going out for a picnic, looking quite relaxed, and they were completely different from the others. Musian summoned the flying sword, and after the original witch stepped on the sword and hugged his waist, he flew away under the gaze of a group of cultivators. He would never have thought that among the monks below, there was a maid who concealed her own breath, and a senior sister in a moon-white dress in the depths of the woods who was quietly watching this scene. I don't know if it was the ability of the original witch or something else. The first area they passed was still snowing heavily, but the forest in the second area had long lost sunshine falling on the snowy ground. Before dusk that day, they were finally about to fly out of area number 2, but Musian found a hidden place near the sea, so he flew to the sea area with the original witch. There was no one around, and it seemed that the sound of the sea tide could be heard faintly, as if it was echoing between heaven and earth. Musian looked at the seascape under the sunset, and suddenly thought of something, and asked, "My personal interface requires me to have contact with other people to get a title, so how did you use it in the past? Did you also contact the protagonist like me?" The original witch shook her head gently, "I have full titles from the beginning." Musian's eyes moved slightly, and he thought of something. Does it mean that after the personal interface is transferred, all titles will be reset? The original witch nodded silently. It's a pity that this obsession doesn't know what the original witch's purpose of transferring her personal interface was. Musian couldn't help feeling a little regretful. "Why is your obsession in the martial world?" Musian asked again. The original witch said, "As a matter of course, the martial world was originally left by me to block the secrets of heaven. It's not strange to be in the martial world, right? The martial world is used to block the secrets of heaven." Musian subconsciously looked at the original witch. She has a pretty face that is so beautiful that it can overturn a city and a country. Her lips are slightly pale, and her sickly complexion makes the already weak and helpless little beauty look even more pitiful. If you only look at her appearance, I am afraid no one would think that she is the original witch. Because in the past, in the impression of the monks, the original witch should be similar to the empress, extremely domineering and confident. But the original witch in front of him looks very weak. And the black robe makes the skin of the original witch look particularly white and crystal. If I don't block the secret of heaven, I am afraid that my thunder tribulation would have come down long ago, the original witch said lightly. The thunder tribulation she mentioned should not be an ordinary thunder tribulation. Musian immediately knew the deep meaning of the words of the original witch, and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Then, he suddenly froze, stared at the eyes of the original witch, and whispered, "Heavenly way." One of the obsessions of the original witch stayed in the martial world to shield the thunder tribulation, and this thunder tribulation obviously did not refer to the thunder tribulation of the tribulation. The only possibility is the heavenly way. But why? After all, why would the obsession of the original witch be punished by the heavenly way? At this moment, Musian's mind was running at high speed, and after a brief hesitation, he seemed to suddenly think of something, stared at the eyes of the original witch, and said, "Are you the body of doom?" The original witch smiled silently. The physique that is not outside the rules of heaven and earth is called the body of doom. but it is not actually doom, but a punishment imposed by the will of heaven. Why does the heavenly way punish cultivators outside the rules of heaven and earth? Musian asked, puzzled. The original witch gazed gently into Musian's eyes, reached out and stroked his handsome face, and said softly, in the past, there was a time when the rules of heaven and earth did not allow the emergence of the enlightenment realm. It was during that time that I broke the shackles of heaven and earth and advanced to the Hedeo realm. In other words, one must comply with the rules of heaven and earth in order not to be punished by the will of heaven. Musian understood this. As if she didn't want to get entangled in this topic, the original witch suddenly put her hand gently on Musian's arm, her shoulder close to him, and said softly, okay, we finally met once. Come on, don't talk about such heavy topics all the time. Rather than this, I would like to ask you, who do you like more, the people around you or me? Here we go, who is your favorite classic? For this kind of scoring question, Musian naturally knew how to answer it. He put a hand on the original witch's shoulder and kept her close to him. Then, he turned his head slightly and stared at the pale and tempting lips of the original witch in front of the sea where the sunset was gradually setting. Of course it's you. The corners of the original witch's mouth were slightly raised, outlining a beautiful arc of success. So, the person you like the most is actually the original witch, not the so-called Qing emperor, concubine Shang Yan, Biruoxi, etc. Looking at the sweet smile of the original witch, for some reason, Musian always felt that something was not right. But when he thought that this obsession would disappear after this, at least he would give her a good memory in the end, so he nodded slightly. My favorite person is naturally you. After finishing speaking, he looked at the beauty in black robe who was suddenly silent and was about to continue speaking. At this time, the original witch suddenly said casually, by the way, do you know that the 9 major regions of the martial arts world are actually interconnected? When she said this, there was a bit of slyness in her eyes. Musian felt something was not right and hesitated. What do you want to say? I will let everyone hear those words and let them all know that the person you like the most is actually me, the original witch said calmly. Musian. Everyone who entered the martial arts world this time will hear what I just said. The original witch continued to die in silence. Musian was confused for a moment. Then, his eyes slowly opened wide, and his heartbeat accelerated uncontrollably. Damn it! Do you love me? Don't you want me to die? Mulang, why don't you speak? The original witch looked at Musian in confusion. Or are you just lying to me? She stared at Musian with a slight smile, and there seemed to be a bit of sadness in her eyes. Musian took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Although I don't know whether the other party is lying to me or whether he really let others hear those words, but now that the words have been spoken, there is only one way to go to the end. At least it would be nice to be able to make her a little happier before the original witch disappeared. This sickly beauty looked so gentle, but she didn't expect to be so sinister. Musian looked at the original witch's face with a sly smile and her gradually illusory figure in silence. Are you leaving? He asked. The original witch raised her slender hand, looked at the increasingly translucent palm, with a bit of reluctance in her eyes, and said softly, we will meet again one day. What's your name? Musian suddenly asked. I used to have no name. What does the past mean? Is there now? Musian heard the meaning of the original witch's words. There is now. The original witch nodded slightly. Then, when Musian looked down, she pursed her moist lips slightly, and then she came close to Musian's ear. My current name is Waymengru. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 281. The original witch, is Waymengru. After hearing the words of the original witch, Musian felt a buzz in his head and his mind went blank. He slowly opened his eyes and stared at the black-robed woman in front of him, feeling extremely ridiculous. You are Waymengru, then who is my maid? Are you Waymengru? Musian stared at the original witch, who was gradually turning into light and shadow, and seemed to be about to disappear, and said hurriedly, "If Wei Mengru is the original witch according to your meaning, then aren't you the obsession she left behind? But if this is the case, why does Sister Mengru have no memories related to the past at all? Could it be that, like Sister Lingxian, the original witch was also a doll created by Wei Mengru?" However, the original witch never answered, or in other words, her figure has gradually become illusory, so that her words are also particularly ethereal. Musian subconsciously reached out to grab her shoulder, but his palm penetrated her shoulder. The original witch's black robe fluttered with the cold wind, clinging to her graceful body as she slowly floated into the air. She turned her head slightly to look at the young man behind her, and then, the corners of her mouth formed a beautiful curve, and her red lips were slightly opened, as if she had said something. Although he couldn't hear her voice, Musian could still tell it from the shape of her mouth. "I have always loved you." The obsession left by the original witch turned into a deep black aura, quietly blowing with the cold wind. However, even Musian did not notice that the black spiritual energy did not disappear after being blown by the wind, but flew to a certain direction in other areas. Other side. Musian looked at the direction where the original witch left with some emotion, her back looking a little desolate and lonely. If what the original witch said is true, it means that the maid is also one of the protagonists, and she has been involved in a lot of connections with herself from the beginning. Wei Mengru stayed by his side because she had an agreement with her parents. If so, did his parents also know something hidden? Thinking about it this way is a bit scary. Although I like Sister Mengru, whether it's her face, personality, or those slender legs, I always feel like this original witch is playing a big game. And it is very likely that his parents are also involved. While Musian was still sitting on the beach looking at the sunset, lost in complicated thoughts, two people were chasing Musian and the original witch on the other side, but in the end they lost them. Wei Mengru raised her head slightly and looked at the black fog that had completely dissipated under the sky, as well as the two people who had disappeared from sight for an unknown period of time, and fell into a long silence. "Senior seems to have discovered us and has been trying to throw us away just now." Tang Sophie broke the silence, but there was a bit of helplessness in her words. "Is that woman the original witch?" Wei Mengru frowned inadvertently and said softly, "But why is the original witch looking for him? Didn't Miss Wei hear it just now?" Tang Sophie looked at Wei Mengru, who was indifferent, with a somewhat complicated and ambiguous look. "And didn't Mr. Mu just say something similar to a confession to that senior?" When she said this, Tang Sophie couldn't help but have a strange look in her eyes. For some reason, even she could hear what Musian said to the original witch just now. It is conceivable that Wei Mengru could also hear what Musian said at that time. Wei Mengru curled her lips and said coldly, "Maybe he used some method to deceive the original witch." Tang Sophie had a different view and shook her head. Since it was the senior's decision, there is probably something about Mr. Mu that attracted her. "That guy is useless except for his face," the maid said coldly. "No matter how clever the original witch is, she is just a simple girl in terms of emotions. For such a simple girl who has never been in love, it is no problem for Musian to gain some favor. However, the existence of the Hedeo realm should be able to master spells such as mind reading. Could it be that, the original witch did not use mind reading on Musian? Otherwise, after seeing through his thoughts, how could you still be interested in your young master? Is it simply because of that good-looking skin?" Tang Sophie could only smile helplessly. She couldn't understand what the relationship between master and servant was. She was obviously a master and servant, but this maid didn't seem to have any respect for her young master. Instead, she said some venomous words from time to time. Tang Sophie secretly sighed again inadvertently. From the looks of it, the original witch has absolutely no intention of taking over the world sea again. The original witch obviously noticed them not long ago, and since she is the saint of the world sea, it is impossible for the original witch not to notice them. But at that time, she had no intention of staying to talk, but left directly with Musian. This was enough to explain something. Just as she was thinking about such a thing, Tang Sophie suddenly seemed to notice something and subconsciously looked up into the air. A crow-black spiritual energy that was so subtle that it was completely difficult to detect flew over lightly. It looked deep and mysterious, and seemed to contain some kind of special spiritual energy. Tang Sophie's eyes froze for a moment, and then she soon realized something. This aura was exactly the same as the aura of the original witch who had just left. However, where was this aura going to fly to? Wei Mengru also noticed this scene. She raised her head slightly, and when she saw the crow-black aura, she couldn't help but have a little more doubt in her eyes. This aura seems to be flying towards us. Tang Sophie stared at the air and suddenly said. But when she said this, her eyes also had a little more curiosity and expectation. This crow-black aura was wrapped with the aura of the original witch. Perhaps, this might be some inheritance left by the original witch. If so, it would land here at this moment, looking for a suitable successor. It's not surprising to have such a guess. Wei Mengru's eyes froze slightly, and she really saw the crow-black aura crossing the sky and flying towards them. For some reason, Wei Mengru suddenly felt that this aura seemed to have an inexplicable sense of intimacy, so she subconsciously stretched out her palm. Then, under Tang Sophie's incredible gaze, the crow-black aura fell from the sky and quietly entered Wei Mengru's body. Tang Sophie was stunned for a moment, staring at Wei Mengru in astonishment. A person who does not belong to the world C, but got a aura left by the original witch? Not only the saint of the world C, but even the maid seemed a little confused and puzzled at this moment. Looking down at her palm, she could feel that there seemed to be something more in her body at this moment. Wei Mengru closed her eyes slightly and held her breath. Before, she had been stuck in the bottleneck period of the 8th level of soul refining, and with the injection of this suspected witch aura, this bottleneck seemed to be about to burst. Boom! When both of them were in astonishment, a deafening roar suddenly came from the sky. Under the sky of the martial world, the leaden cloud slowly moved with the wind and gathered above the two people. At this moment, even the cultivators from all over the martial world were involuntarily attracted by this terrifying thunder tribulation. Many cultivators had a bit of fear in their eyes. They were all descendants of the ancient families, and they had seen the thunder tribulation of the elders in the family refining the spirit and returning to the void in the past. But even the thunder tribulation of returning to the void in the past had never seen such an exaggerated tribulation cloud. Boom! With another deafening roar, Wei Mengru suddenly burst out with amazing black mist, and at that moment, the tribulation cloud in the sky was shaking violently, and there seemed to be a white lightning flashing faintly, as if something was brewing. After a brief gaze and hesitation, some cultivators immediately flew towards the direction where Wei Mengru was. Such a big commotion at once would make anyone curious. Musian also raised his head. When he saw the calamity clouds gathering in a certain place, he couldn't help but feel a little more worried. If what the original witch just said was true, it means that Wei Mengru is really the original witch. The original witch's obsession just disappeared, and suddenly there was such a big commotion. Maybe it has something to do with Wei Mengru. I have to go over and take a look. Musian immediately made up his mind, gathered his thoughts, raised his hand to summon the sword, and headed towards the direction where the calamity clouds gathered. The cultivators who participated in the martial world assessment all set off and headed towards the direction where Wei Mengru was. Once people from several major areas gathered in the same place, such a chaotic place might be able to fish in troubled waters and get points to pass the assessment. At the same time, the powerful people from all over Zhou seemed to have noticed something, and they opened their eyes and looked at the direction of Dongzhou in doubt. For those young cultivators, they might just think it was a thunder calamity. But only these great powers know that this is not an ordinary promotion-level thunder tribulation. If it is only the realm of refining spirit, it cannot lead to the great Dao. But now, the heavenly Dao has been drawn out. Because the first person who broke the shackles of heaven and earth and did not belong to the rules of heaven and earth, the great Dao was affected. In a certain area, the old man in Yayu's body suddenly made a doubtful and surprised sound. Huh? Teacher, what's wrong? Yayu asked in his heart. However, the old man did not answer, as if he was concentrating on feeling something. Then, he suddenly opened his turbid eyes, and for the first time in history, his tone was a little more excited, and he said in a hurry, "Go to the place of thunder tribulation, that thing must be obtained." His tone was full of excitement, as if he wanted to directly occupy Yayu's body to seize the fortune of heaven and earth. Although Yayu was puzzled, since the teacher said so, he naturally no longer hesitated and immediately went in the direction of the maid. For a moment, the attention of these talented disciples who participated in the assessment was focused on the place where the thunder tribulation gathered. At this moment, the people who were at the center of the thunder tribulation were Wei Mengru and the saint of the world C, Tang Sufei. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 282. Chaos Body, kill until no one dares to participate. Dark clouds were rolling in the sky in the martial world, accompanied by heavy thunder, as if they had the momentum to swallow up the heaven and earth. The clouds and haze turned the entire world into a gray mess. Most monks in the God-refining realm have experienced thunder tribulations in the past. The stronger their talent, the more terrifying the thunder tribulations they will encounter. Rumor has it that under the 9 levels of thunder tribulation, no matter how talented you are, you will inevitably perish in the end. From the first level to the 9th level of thunder tribulation, each level of thunder tribulation will add a thunder dragon, and the destructive power of this thunder dragon will gradually become stronger in an incremental manner. If one encounters a 9th level thunder tribulation at the peak of God refining, then this 9th thunder tribulation is equivalent to a serious blow from a monk in the realm of returning to the void or even above. However, Wei Mengru's thunder catastrophe obviously did not belong to the 9th level of thunder catastrophe. This is the way of heaven being influenced and punishing. Because she is the body of doom and does not belong to the rules of heaven and earth. Although this kind of punishment is a thunder disaster, it only targets the person involved. If other monks step into it, it will not cause a new thunder disaster. The influence of heaven is often accompanied by the drop of treasure, which is the reason why so many monks gather here at this moment. When Yayu arrived at the scene, dozens of monks had gathered 100 feet away from the area where Wei Mengru was. Tang Sufei was worried about the thunder disaster that would affect Wei Mengru, so she did not approach rashly. She was also in the crowd at this moment. Yayu stood in the crowd, staring in disbelief at the figure of the maid in a yellow skirt in mid-air. Obviously he should be the protagonist of destiny, but the maid next to Muzian is already on the verge of returning to the void. One of the signs of returning to the void realm is being able to fly in the air without the help of flying swords. Although Wei Mengru has not yet refined her spirit to return to the void, she has obviously reached that threshold. Even he is only at the 6th level of the divine refining level now, and he has only managed to reach a higher level by practicing hard with the help of mixed spiritual energy. Such a comparison naturally makes people feel a little difficult to balance. It would be fine if Wei Mengru failed in the thunder tribulation. If she succeeded in overcoming the tribulation in the end, she would be the first person under Lan Mulian. When thinking of this, Yayu's fists clenched quietly, and his desire for power became stronger. He took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. "Teacher, where is the good thing you mentioned?" "Don't worry, just watch carefully." The old man in his body suppressed the excitement in his heart and replied, "That thing will probably descend when that little girl officially goes through the tribulation, and that time is the best time for you to seize the good fortune of heaven and earth." but remember, there will be someone else who will notice what is in the thunder tribulation later, so you must know the right time to take action. Yayu nodded slightly at first, and then, as if he thought of something, he asked subconsciously, but other monks who enter other people's thunder tribulations will also be forced to survive the tribulation, and will the thunder tribulation be even more terrifying than before? Although he considered himself a genius, Yayu did not dare or did not want to try whether he could survive the thunder disaster involving more than 2 people. Her thunder disaster will not cause additional thunder disasters, don't worry, the old man's voice came from the bottom of Yayu's heart. In the past, I was wondering why her cultivation speed was so much faster than those of the proud ones. Now it seems that the answer has been revealed. Teacher, what do you mean? People outside the rules of heaven and earth are not recognized by heaven, so the thunder tribulation she accepted does not naturally belong to heaven. In other words, she is deceiving God to overcome the tribulation, so her thunder tribulation will be far more difficult than others, much, much higher. All in all, even if you break into it for a while, there won't be any problems. However, that little girl may not be so lucky. Yayu's eyes moved slightly, and he subconsciously raised his head and said, what the teacher means is, thunder tribulation will not resonate with you, but for everyone who enters the thunder tribulation, the thunder tribulation will resonate with those who overcome it. The old voice was full of depth. This is its punishment for those who break away from the rules of heaven and earth. After a brief hesitation, Yayu stared at Wei Mengru in mid-air and said to himself, if this is the case, once someone notices the good things in the thunder tribulation and then rush into it, wouldn't she? Was he directly wiped out by thunder? Maybe. However, what we should focus on is not this, but I know, a holy object born in a thunderstorm, Yayu immediately replied. Listening to the voices of the monks around him, his eyes became a little more eager and expectant. Boom! At this time, a sound that seemed to shatter the sky resounded under the sky, and everyone's eyes subconsciously looked into the sky. Wei Mengru stood with her sword in her hand, wearing a fluttering yellow skirt. With her as the center, there seemed to be faint thunder flakes splashing around. This is a symbol of a thunderstorm brewing. This thunder catastrophe seems to be different from the thunder tribulations I have experienced in the past. It seems to only target this female cultivator. Someone in the crowd immediately came to this conclusion after a short observation. Yes, if ordinary monks overcome the tribulation, other monks who come close will trigger new thunder tribulations, but now that we are so close to her, we have not resonated with the thunder tribulation. It is indeed a bit strange. Everyone looked at the scene and couldn't help but whisper with people who were familiar with each other. Boom! Another deafening roar resounded through the sky, causing many monks' eyes to fall on Wei Mengru in the distance. They all realized that a thunderstorm was brewing, and it was very terrifying. Under the sky, the billowing dark clouds seemed to have formed vast stars, and among the stars, a roaring thunder dragon was hovering in the mid-air. It has a hideous and terrifying shape, with a flick of its tail and splashes of countless thunder shards, and a pale white light bead in its mouth. The chi of heaven, almost someone in the crowd blurted out. Then, everyone's eyes became a little more fiery, and their eyes were full of excitement. Generally speaking, there is a very small probability that a thunder catastrophe can bring down a holy object, but like Wei Mengru, there is a chance that a thunder catastrophe in the God-refining realm can give birth to the chi of heaven. Even among billions of people, I am afraid that can't find one. This is the protagonist of destiny. Although her bad luck was astonishingly exaggerated, but at this moment, there was indeed a divine energy coming to her during the thunder disaster. At this time, the thunder dragon suddenly let go of its mouth, and the air of heaven fell from its mouth. Along with the splashing thunder shavings, the air of heaven hovered above the thunder tribulation, emitting a deep and mysterious dark halo. It is the magic that attracts people involuntarily at first sight. Huang Manting had arrived at this area at some point. At this moment, She raised her head slightly and stared at the heavenly energy in the air, with a somewhat meaningful look in her eyes. The monks on the side were all eager to make a move, staring closely at the heavenly energy, eager to go forward and snatch it away. But they all know that although Waymengru's thunder disaster will not affect them, the first person to set off will definitely be besieged by others. Finally, a monk in green robes could no longer bear the feeling of having to look at the treasure in front of him. He immediately turned into a stream of light and flew towards the heavenly energy in mid-air. At this time, the Saint Tang Sophie, who was wearing a blue dress, suddenly raised her hand to seal the secret, and a brilliant light accompanied by terrifying pressure struck the green-robed monk who was the first to set off. The green-robed monk had no choice but to stop. When he raised his head, he happened to see Tang Sophie standing in front of him, with a faint smile on his face. Some people are going through the tribulation now. It's a bit awkward for you to rush into them rashly, is it reasonable? The green-robed monk frowned and stared at Tang Sophie uncertainly. Then, he glanced at the Chi of heaven not far away, and suddenly smiled and said, "If I remember correctly, the person who overcame the tribulation should be from Dongzhou." Monk. Why do you, a saint from the sea of the world, speak for the people of Dongzhou? Tang Sophie's expression remained unchanged and she said with a slight smile, "I just can't stand what you're doing. Don't you know what will happen if you rush into the thunder tribulation area now? Waymengru's thunder tribulation is quite special. If the green-robed monk breaks into it, he will certainly not be disturbed by the thunder tribulation, but the difficulty for Waymengru to overcome the tribulation will increase exponentially. At present, Waymengru is suspected to be involved with the original witch. Even if she offends everyone present, Tang Sophie cannot let them step in and disturb Waymengru." However, the green-robed monk seemed to have heard some joke, and suddenly smiled and said, "Miss Tang is really upright, but if you are blocking here now, don't you want to get the heavenly energy in the thunder tribulation area? Also," he said in a cold voice with a bit of coldness in his eyes, "I don't need other forces to dictate my affairs in Dongzhou. I think I'm not the only one here who has this idea, right?" When the green-robed monk said this, he turned to look at the people behind him. Although there was no response, some people couldn't help but nodded secretly. "If Miss Tang insists on standing in front of us, then we will have to get rid of you first, and then allocate the ownership of the heavenly energy," the green-robed monk said sadly. No one in the room answered. Although they know that the green-robed monk is using them, are they not using the green-robed monk? The saint who forces back the sea of the world will have the opportunity to seize the energy of heaven. Seeing that no one spoke, the green-robed monk couldn't help but sneered secretly, then raised his hands and cupped his fists and said, "Since Miss Tang is not going to retreat, I can only forgive you for being rude. People from the World Sea also want to interfere in the internal affairs of Dongzhou, but they have stretched their hands a little too long." Another sinister voice sounded from the crowd, secretly fanning the flames. Originally, because of the previous attack on Emperor Qing, there was some friction in the relationship between Kyushu, but these words now made the already tense atmosphere become tense. However, at this moment, an understated voice suddenly came, "If World Ocean can't do it, can the restricted area do it?" Everyone turned their heads subconsciously and discovered that among them, there was the proud man of the restricted area, Yechian. A behemoth from Dongzhou chose to stand on Waymengru's side. No matter what the purpose was, it made the monks who were just about to make a move calm down a bit. The green-robed monk frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Yechian, I heard that you and Musian are not dealing with each other. This matter should have nothing to do with you, right?" Yechian shook his head and smiled, "I'm not helping him, but in any case, he has a relationship with the saint in my restricted area. If I sit back and do nothing now, I'm afraid the outside world will think that my restricted area is ruthless." Even though he disliked Musian and Ye Lingxian had a very close relationship, and it was certain that Ye Lingxian would inherit the forbidden area in the future. Ye Gan was very clear about what to do. However, even though Yagan's words shocked some cultivators, they still had a strong desire for the heavenly Dao Qi in the Thunder Tribulation area at the moment. This was the martial world, and the elders would find a way to suppress the fights between the juniors. Moreover, Musian and the Forbidden Area were only indirectly related, and there was no reason for the Forbidden Area to take action for a maidservant beside Musian. Thinking of this, some of the cultivators who had calmed down because of the word Forbidden Area began to get a little restless. After all, some of them were not in Dongzhou, and they left after the Ascension Conference ended, but if they missed this heavenly Dao Qi, they might not get the second one in their lifetime. Amitabha. At this time, a ray of Buddha's light shone everywhere, and a monk from the western regions wearing a cassock raised the Vajra, and a brilliant golden pattern seemed to appear behind him. Since all donors have no interest in the Qi of heaven, then I will accept it with a smile. The monk turned into a golden light and went straight to the Qi of heaven. Bald donkey, get out of here. Tang Sufi's eyes were full of coldness, and she immediately pinched the spell to kill and blocked the monk from the western regions. However, with the first person taking the lead, some monks also took this opportunity to rush towards the direction where Wei Mengru was. The green-robed monk's eyes flashed slightly, and he immediately rushed towards the Qi of heaven. Wang Teng, do you really want to be an enemy of the restricted area? Yagan took a step forward with a hint of coldness in his eyes and blocked the green-robed monk. Wang Teng narrowed his eyes and smiled, Brother Yagan, you are joking. There is no one in Dongzhou who dares to be an enemy of the restricted area. But you can see that many people here are not from Dongzhou. Instead of letting them take away the heavenly Qi, it would be better for us to take it away, right? When he said this, he glanced at a young cultivator in the crowd and seemed to say something in a voice transmission. The cultivator nodded secretly, turned into a stream of light, and rushed towards the direction of the heavenly Qi in the chaos. Yagan looked up and his face suddenly darkened. It was another cultivator from the Wang family. These two people really didn't care about anything for the heavenly Qi. Boom! Accompanied by the first cultivator who stepped into the Thunder Tribulation area, the Thunder Tribulation in the sky was accompanied by a roar, and a more terrifying aura burst out faintly. Tang Sufi's face changed slightly, and she glanced at Wei Mengru anxiously in secret. She didn't know what the original witch had left for Wei Mengru, but if the Thunder Tribulation failed this time, it would be difficult to have such a good opportunity next time. Amitabha, donor, you are obsessed. A Buddhist chant resounded, and the urge to put down the butcher knife subconsciously buzzed in Tang Sufi's mind. After a brief trance, her eyes gradually became clear, and she snorted coldly, cutting off the monk's spell. However, she had to focus her attention on this Western region monk. This saint of the world sea is indeed a darling of heaven, but the other party can represent the Western region to participate in the Ascension Conference. Naturally there are also extraordinary things, and it is still difficult to tell the winner in a short time. While fighting with Yagan, Wang Teng glanced at him inadvertently. When he saw that his younger brother Wang Shuo was about to approach the aura of heaven, a faint smile appeared on his face. It's time. On the other side, Yayu's eyes flashed with a gleam of light, and the whole person turned into a stream of light, also rushing towards the direction of the heavenly Qi. A burst of black fog surged, and the saint of the southern wilderness could not wait any longer, and also rushed towards the direction of the heavenly Qi. Nigati, you are a person from the southern wilderness, it is better not to interfere in the affairs of Dongzhou. Yagan raised his head and shouted angrily. The saint of the southern wilderness was wrapped in thick black fog, and ignored it, sneering, the heavenly Qi should belong to those with strength, regardless of identity. After he finished speaking, he increased his speed to the extreme, raised his hand and grabbed the direction of the heavenly Qi. Boom! As Nigati stepped into the Thunder Tribulation area, Wei Mengru's Thunder Tribulation, which was already difficult for two people, became more and more terrifying. The surface of the thunder dragon that splashed thunder debris seemed to have a deep black light pattern. This thunder tribulation is only for her, other cultivators will not be affected by the thunder tribulation, but her thunder tribulation will become more and more difficult. A cultivator could not help but sigh in sympathy. It seems to be like this. And if I remember correctly, this woman has been alone since she entered the martial world. I don't know why she seems to have some intersection with the saint of the world C. No matter how talented she is not good enough in front of many cultivators. I can only say that it is a crime to hold a treasure. In these feelings, Nigeti looked at Waymengru, who closed her eyes not far away and seemed to be ready to face the thunder tribulation. He looked up at the thunder tribulation in the air that became more terrifying because of the entry of several people, and couldn't help but sneered. It's really pitiful. If I were you, I would crush the jade slip now and leave, so as not to become the target of public criticism here. The black mist on Nigeti's body burst out, covering the aura of the heavenly way and blocking the eyes of everyone. He took this opportunity to raise his hand and grab in the direction of the heavenly energy. The black fog seemed to be able to absorb the spiritual energy of others. After noticing this, everyone had no choice but to retreat violently, including Yayu. He had suffered a loss from Nigeti's ability in the past, so he was naturally very alert at this time. When Yayu retreated violently from the black fog, he saw Nigeti reaching out to grab the heavenly chi in the air. At the same time, the destructive aura on the thunder dragon in the air became more and more intense. Waymengru opened her eyes, raised her hand, and slashed at Nigeti with a sword. However, the black mist on Nigeti swallowed up the sword energy. He glanced at Waymengru behind him and sneered, "If you didn't have this thunder tribulation, you could threaten me, but now, instead of worrying about the heavenly chi, you might as well worry about yourself first. You are alone now." Waymengru had a hint of coldness in her eyes. She was about to raise her sword, but she sensed the terrifying power contained in the thunder dragon in the air. She could only watch Nigeti reach out to the heavenly chi that belonged to her. "You won't leave the martial world safely." Waymengru stared at Nigeti, her pretty face covered with frost. "Wait until you can survive the thunder tribulation." Nigeti smiled lightly and reached out to grab the heavenly chi. Boom! A whistling sound like breaking the wind suddenly came from a distance, and then, at the moment when Nigeti reached out to grab the heavenly chi, a green light that seemed to purify the world almost covered most of the thunder tribulation area. Under countless horrified gazes, the pure world green lotus fell from midair and hit Nigeti hard. In midair, Musian, wearing a black and gold robe, stood outside the thunder tribulation area. The sound of a phoenix could be heard faintly from the 100 birds chain array behind him, and a golden light quietly lit up behind him. "You took advantage of a girl's inability to fight back and took advantage of others' fortune. You still speak so righteously, but you will be punished by heaven." The green light enveloped the cultivators in the thunder tribulation area and forced them to withdraw from the thunder tribulation area. They looked at the pure world green lotus with fear. Nigeti suddenly raised his head and looked, his eyes slightly fixed. "Musian." Musian looked around at the people outside the thunder tribulation area, bowed and smiled. "Everyone, I wonder if you can give me some face. The energy of heaven is what my maid got in the thunder tribulation. It is not right to rob it. Mr. Mew, are you going to offend so many people for a maid?" Hearing this, a cultivator in the crowd immediately frowned. Musian shook his head and smiled. "To be honest, she is not only my maid, but also my Taoist partner. Isn't it natural to help your Taoist partner?" Musian's voice was not loud, but it was clearly heard by everyone. Waymengru in the distance also glanced at Musian inadvertently, as if she wanted to say something, but she held back. At the same time, Musian's eyes swept over some cultivators inadvertently. Some of these cultivators were disciples of Lianji section. Musian had had some interactions with them in the sect in the past, and some of them owed Musian a lot of favors. These cultivators looked at each other, and there was a bit of struggle in their eyes. After a while, Nearly a dozen people bowed their hands, and then stepped back. "Thank you all." Musian also bowed his hands, and then his eyes swept to the remaining dozen cultivators, as well as Yayu and others who had never given in. "Actually, I don't really want to fight." "Are you really unwilling to step back a little?" Musian asked in a somewhat inquiring tone. "Musian, stop bluffing. Even if you have a strange green lotus, what can you do? Do you still want to blast us out of the martial world together?" Nigeti sneered. "Umitba, Mudonor, you are too obsessed. You should put down your butcher knife and concentrate on practicing." Jing Chen clasped his hands together, with a gentle golden glow behind him. Although Musian's green lotus is strange, if so many people come together, he can't maintain this strange green lotus for too long. Everyone present knew this, so there was no intention of retreating. "Do you think you are enough by yourself?" Yayu also sneered, looking at Musian with a strong fighting spirit in his eyes. However, Musian still maintained a gentle smile. "I am enough by myself. At least, it is enough to support Wei Mengru through the thunder tribulation." The calamity clouds in the distance rolled in, and the deep lightning caused a slight commotion among the crowd present. Why did Wei Mengru attract a new thunder tribulation? Someone couldn't help but whispered. Nigeti also had some doubts in his eyes. Then, as if he had noticed something, his face changed slightly, and he said angrily, "No, this is Musian's thunder tribulation." He finally knew why Musian was so confident. He didn't rely on the pure world green lotus, but on this thunder tribulation. Musian's 4th grade thunder tribulation. "Musian, are you crazy? Once everyone goes through the tribulation together, even if we are eliminated, you will definitely not be spared." The thunder tribulation enveloped nearly a dozen people, and many well-educated and talented people could not help but curse loudly, and hurriedly retreated away from Musian. Musian pretended not to hear, raised his hand and stretched his waist, with a gentle smile on his face. He hasn't been a villain for a long time, and some people seem to have forgotten that he used to be a serious villain. Even if the villain supporting role in the personal interface disappeared later, and he retired from the villain business, it does not mean that the hostility is really gone. Boom. The bottleneck of the 4th level of soul refining was completely broken, and the calamity cloud completely enveloped Nigeti and others. At this moment, the genius disciples including Nigeti could not help but feel a little more hatred and deep regret in their hearts. The spirit of heaven is important, but after all, there is only one. Once they are eliminated in the martial world, they will not be able to participate in the subsequent ascension meeting. They are all geniuses in major forces. If they are eliminated in the martial world, it will be the biggest joke in history. Imagine that in the future, when they walk outside, someone will point at them and say, "Look, that person is so and so, one of the geniuses of the world, but he didn't even pass the martial world assessment." They will be nailed to the pillar of shame in this life. However, at this moment, Musian's thunder tribulation has enveloped everyone, and they can't escape even if they want to. So many people go through the tribulation together, no one can resist to the end. Musian. Nigeti and others were filled with anger and stared at Musian with hatred. Musian always kept a calm smile and welcomed the terrifying thunder tribulation of more than 20 people. The jade slip of Lianji sect would guarantee that he would not die in this thunder tribulation, but if he was seriously injured, the jade slip would send him out of the martial world. In this way, he would not be qualified to participate in the Ascension Conference. Nigeti and others thought that Musian did not care about the Ascension Conference and would use this method, but in fact, he wanted to participate in the Ascension Conference more than anyone else. After all, if a girl around him won the Ascension Conference, he would have to prepare to get married. Well, just in time, those who were going to get married also arrived one after another. Musian saw the purple figure that gradually came into view not far away, and the beautiful woman in a white dress with a small breast. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Then, under the hateful eyes of Nigeti and others, Musian showed a gentle smile. I told you that you will be punished by God. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 283. If this spread to the outside world, no one would believe that a cultivator in the refining spirit realm stopped nearly 20 cultivators of the same realm. Those who can participate in the martial arts assessment are basically geniuses in their own families, and some are even the pride of the world sent by various continents. However, at this moment, they were shocked by Musian's power alone. No, they even turned around and wanted to escape from here. Musian sacrificed the pure world Green Lotus, and the thunder tribulation behind him exuded a destructive aura. The heavy snow fell with the wind, and the dark sky seemed to collapse a corner. The lightning illuminated the faces of the cultivators present. Musian, are you crazy? There is a thunder tribulation of more than 20 people, even you can't be spared. You don't even plan to participate in the Ascension Conference, Nigeti said angrily. Even if they racked their brains, no one would have thought that someone would hide a thunder tribulation as a trump card, and now they are all directly implicated. If I was eliminated in the martial world this time and returned to the southern wilderness, I would probably be ridiculed to death by my clansmen, and the status of the Holy Sun would never be comparable to Regina. Others don't care what you have experienced in the process, they only look at the results. And the result is, Nigeti didn't even pass the martial world assessment. At this time, another cultivator from Dongzhou said anxiously, Brother Mu, you and I are both cultivators from Dongzhou. We should be united in this Ascension Conference. Yes, let us go now, I can promise that I will repay this favor in the future. The dozen cultivators who were enveloped by the thunder tribulation all spoke quickly, and even Yeyu remained silent at this moment. Even he knew very well at this moment that the fate of these people was in the hands of Musian alone. If they turn around and flee now, the mysterious Green Lotus will certainly stop them. At that time, if Musian activates the spiritual energy in the cauldron and completely resonates with the thunder tribulation, the thunder tribulation may fall directly. At that time, they will not be able to escape. Musian couldn't help but chuckle. Now that we know that everyone is a cultivator from Dongzhou, should we unite? Why didn't you want to unite when you ignored the crossers for the sake of the heavenly energy and increased the difficulty of the thunder tribulation for my maid? They regretted not because they knew they were wrong, but because they regretted the appearance of Musian and why they didn't act more decisively and snatch the heavenly energy earlier. While this side was in a state of fear and trembling, at this time outside the thunder tribulation area, the disciples of the sect who had previously given Musian face and withdrew from the competition could not help but secretly rejoice in their hearts. If they had greedily joined the ranks of snatching the heavenly energy at that time, I am afraid that the people who are now enveloped by Musian's thunder tribulation will include them. If this happens, he won't be able to obtain the heavenly Daochi, and he won't be able to pass the martial arts assessment. It's simply a loss. In addition, some people who had been cold-eyed about it secretly discussed it. Is this Musian crazy or does he have a backup plan? One person against more than a dozen people, even he can't withstand such a thunder tribulation, right? But this man really protects his wife. When his Taoist partner is bullied, he doesn't hesitate to offend so many people at the same time. Isn't he afraid of revenge from some forces in Dongzhou after he gets out? As soon as this was said, it immediately caused a more heated discussion. Musian is trying his best to suppress the thunder tribulation now. He should want to negotiate with those people, for example, let them hand over some points each so that they can pass the assessment or something. It is the most reasonable thing to do. If he really goes through the tribulation with these dozen cultivators, Musian himself will not be spared. He should negotiate with them if he is rational. Hey, I am afraid that some of the cultivators who are threatened by Musian will see through his plan and refuse to compromise. If he is forced into a corner, the arrow is on the string. I don't know what decision Musian will make in the end. On the other side, Wang Teng and Tang Sufei clapped their hands. He retreated several steps back, raised his head suddenly and looked up at the sky, and said coldly, "Mr. Mu, I am Wang Teng of the Wang family. Can you give me a face and let my useless brother out?" His voice was transmitted to Musian in the distance through the spiritual energy. Musian seemed to have heard this voice and turned his head to look under the dark sky. The voice came through the spirit energy with a mocking laugh, "Who are you sending?" When he came just now, he clearly saw Wang Teng also intending to step into the thunder tribulation area to seize the heavenly energy, but was intercepted by Tang Sufei in the end. "Now you want him to let him go?" Wang Teng's face suddenly became gloomy, and some cultivators who did not intervene in the matter looked at Wang Teng with a bit of gloating in their eyes. This genius of the Wang family was quite arrogant before entering the martial world, and the way he spoke and his attitude made many people feel a little disgusted. But because the other party was from the Wang family of Dongzhou, they could only swallow their anger and avoid direct conflicts with the other party as much as possible. Those outside Dongzhou were fine, but these cultivators of Dongzhou naturally did not want to offend a behemoth like the Wang family of Dongzhou. Wang Teng stared at the direction of Musian with an unpleasant expression. After a while, he sneered, "Even if he can finally escape from the thunder tribulation, he can't pass the martial arts assessment." After this, many people couldn't help but feel more sympathetic towards Musian. Wang Teng is a 6th grade soul refiner, and with the special skills of the Wang family, he is invincible among the same grade. Even if Musian can leave a backup plan and walk out of the thunder tribulation, he will have to face Wang Teng's wrath in the end. Everyone has heard about some of Musian's past affairs in the Lianji sect, but no matter how much Musian's strength is said to be inferior to Wang Teng, plus there are many people in the martial arts world who are different from Wang Teng. Teng's good friends and those who owed Musian a favor in the past would probably not want to offend Wang Teng. Not only that, the people who are most likely to inherit the position of head of the royal family in the future are Wang Ying and Wang Teng. If Wang Teng becomes the head of the royal family in the future, relying on the influence of the Wang family in Dongzhou, he wants to give Musian a little shoes to wear. It's not that difficult to think about. Unless Musian can stay in Lianji sect for the rest of his life. At this time, a pleasant voice suddenly came from behind the crowd, "The Wang family is really extremely powerful, but I'm afraid you don't need to decide who can pass the martial arts assessment." The calm and indifferent voice seemed to reveal the disdain of a superior, which made everyone's eyes involuntarily fall on the person who spoke. Then, someone immediately recognized the identity of the person who spoke, and almost blurted out, "Ye Lingxian." Some monks in Dongzhou have heard of the name Ye Lingxian. Most people don't know that she belongs to the restricted area. However, in a place like Lianji sect, there are only a few disciples who can be called geniuses, and Ye Lingxian it is one of them. Wang Teng turned around, his eyes narrowed slightly, and his face suddenly turned ugly. "Miss Ye, this matter has nothing to do with you." The other monks didn't know Ye Lingxian's identity, but as the legitimate son of the Wang family, Wang Teng naturally knew that the elegant and charming girl in front of him was the saint in the restricted area. Ye Lingxian did not give Wang Teng any face, and looked coldly, "Since you can use your power to overwhelm others, you should have made corresponding preparations." In the crowd, some monks who had some connections with Wang Teng seemed to be ready to take action. At this time, not far behind, a cold voice came from the crowd. "Everyone should think carefully before taking action. The disciples of my sect are participating in the assessment in the martial arts world and will not take care of each other. However, if they are attacked by a group, they cannot sit idly by." Everyone looked up, and a woman wearing a moon-white dress suddenly appeared in people's field of vision. Lan Mulian. There was a slight commotion in the crowd, and they looked at Lan Mulian with fear. The most powerful competitor in this Immortal Ascension Conference is the direct disciple of the master of the Lianji section. Although her strength in the martial arts world will also be compressed in the God-refining realm, she has some skills that can only be used in the return to the Void realm. Lan Mulian can still use it. No one would want to offend such a being. Wang Teng looked at this scene, feeling extremely frustrated in his heart, and said in a deep voice, "Since you guys insist on speaking on Mr. Mu's side, I have nothing to say, but even if Muzian used Thunder Tribulation to defeat my brother today, Wang Shuo can only win without force. I think everyone present knows this. Thunder Tribulation is only possible when the God Refining Realm is promoted. In the final analysis, this Thunder Tribulation is not a type of one's own strength, it is just opportunistic. With my brother Wang Shuo's talent, if we were to fight him head-on, there would be no way he would be eliminated from the martial arts world. No. Of those who are currently trapped in the Thunder Tribulation by Muzian, which one is not as strong as him?" At this time, Bairuoxi suddenly said, "Is that the extremely talented younger brother you mentioned?" She looked up into the air. Wang Teng turned his head to look, and then his eyes suddenly solidified. In mid-air in the distance, Wang Shuo was about to turn around and escape from the Thunder Tribulation area, but was immediately intercepted by Muzian. Muzian sacrificed the Pure World Green Lotus. While the formation behind him was activated, he punched Wang Shuo plainly one after another. The black and gold robe seemed to be plated with a layer of light gold. The brilliance made his eyes turn golden as bright as day. Lan Mulian's eyes moved slightly, with a bit of surprise in his eyes. A physique similar to the holy body of destiny? Wang Teng's eyes flickered slightly, staring at Muzian with a bit of disbelief. The fact that the Thunder Tribulation has not come down means that Muzian is trying his best to suppress the Thunder Tribulation, but it stands to reason that when suppressing his own breakthrough time, he should be unable to distract himself from fighting with others. Obviously, he should have a physique similar to a natural spirit body. But if that's the case, what's going on with the golden radiance on his body now? This is obviously a different physique. He has a twin constitution? However, even with twin constitutions, if they are not used properly, it is better to specialize in one. When this thought flashed through Wang Teng's mind, he suddenly saw Muzian pulling out a black sword from the void, and a shadow of a gorgeous woman seemed to appear behind him. The woman was wearing a dark-colored palace dress, and her back was beautiful. When Muzian raised his sword, the woman behind him also raised his sword. Lone Star Sword. Boom. The moment the sword struck out, a brilliant golden light enveloped Wang Shuo, causing Wang Teng's pupils in the distance to shrink. The third constitution. But how is this possible? Each monk should have at most two physiques. How could there be a third physique? Naturally, some of the people present saw the clues, and looked at Muzian with a bit of surprise and uncertainty in their eyes. Among the most powerful contenders for the Immortal Ascension Conference, no one included Muzian from beginning to end. The reason is that most people don't think Muzian can win the first place in the Ascension Conference. However, the strength he showed today far exceeded people's imagination. Although he rarely took action, his combat experience and even this extremely strange physique made people awe-inspiring. Wang Teng looked at the two fighting figures, staring at Muzian, surprised at why he had more than three physiques. And after a while, an extremely absurd idea popped up in his mind. Chaos body. Not only Wang Teng, even Bairuoxi looked at Muzian with a little more surprise. She knew that Muzian was a chaotic body, but she didn't know that he actually had a physique similar to hers. The shadow that appeared behind Muzian at this moment was Gong Lianyu, who was sleeping in Bairuoxi's body at this moment. Seeing that Wang Shuo was caught off guard so quickly, Nigeti and others took this opportunity to turn around and rush towards the area outside the Thunder Tribulation. Muzian did not move, but raised his hand and sacrificed the 8 desolate dream map, blocking the crowd. Feeling the terrifying suction of the 8 desolate dream map, the steps of several people who were about to escape could not help but stop. Nigeti turned his head suddenly and said angrily, "Muzian, you dare? Do you think I dare?" Muzian smiled freely and kicked Wang Shuo back into the Thunder Tribulation. Then, the cauldron that was originally suppressing him completely relaxed. Boom! The spiritual energy burst out, and at that moment, the thunder tribulation in the air sensed the existence of more than 10 cultivators, and the thunder tribulation sounded loudly. And the many cultivators trapped in the thunder tribulation by Musian were shocked and angry. Musian simply closed his eyes. The thunder tribulation of more than 20 people, even if the cultivators of the Return to Void realm came, they could not resist it. This move can be said to hurt the enemy 1,000 times and hurt yourself 1,000 times. Boom! In mid-air, dozens of thunder dragons circled under the sky. The vast thunder tribulation moved all the cultivators present, staring at the spectacular scene in a daze. Nigeti and others cursed in their hearts, but they had no time to care about Musian at the moment. They urged their spiritual energy and wanted to give it a try to survive this extremely terrifying thunder tribulation. Musian is really a ruthless person. He kills his enemies and himself, and even doesn't let himself go. The cultivators in the distance looked at the scene and couldn't help but sighed in a low voice. It's a pity. With the strength he just showed, if he participated in the Ascension Conference, he would definitely have a place. But his character is pretty good. He is so angry for his beloved. It seems that he has a good relationship with the maid next to him. Miss Wei's talent and appearance are both top-notch. If it were me, I would also be furious when I saw others bullying my Taoist partner. These cultivators didn't seem to notice that while they were discussing these things, the atmosphere behind them had unconsciously become extremely cold. Musian naturally didn't know what was being talked about here at the moment, and he didn't have the energy to think about these things now. The thunder dragon hovered in the air, with lightning chips flying, as if emitting the breath of death. It flew so slowly, but so gracefully, as if preparing for the ritual of depriving life. Boom! Finally, the thunder dragon fell from the sky, carrying a black breath and attacking Musian. Is this the thunder tribulation of nearly 20 cultivators? This power has exceeded the refining god realm by a lot. Musian took a deep breath, drew out the sword again, injected spiritual energy into it, and blasted at the thunder dragon. The sword was accompanied by the stars, very calm, but it contained the strongest and most violent breath, and collided with the thunder dragon. The power of the thunder dragon was indeed weakened by the lone star sword, but the power of this thunder dragon had exceeded the refining god realm by a lot, and as it approached, Musian actually found that his spiritual energy was gradually difficult to operate. No wonder so many monks died in the thunder tribulation. If the thunder tribulation can also restrict the circulation of the monk's spiritual energy, how many people can successfully overcome the tribulation? The brilliance of the lone star sword was completely swallowed by the thunder dragon. The screams of monks came from the side one after another. Musian looked sideways. Nigeti and others were swallowed by the thunder dragon before they could even resist. And yeah, you seemed to let the old man in his body possess him at the critical moment, barely resisting the thunder dragon. However, even so, it was useless. Because the second thunder dragon in the air was ready to move. No one could escape this thunder tribulation. It seems that I am really ready to get married, Musian grinned. However, it is worth it to exchange one person for a group of people. He let go of the black sword, opened his hands, and fell straight from the air. The whole sky was completely reflected in Musian's vision: snowflakes, tribulation clouds, cold wind, and the hideous and terrifying thunder dragon attacking him. Turning his head slightly, he could vaguely see Yelingxian and others not far away. Although he could not see them clearly, Musian could sense that their eyes were fixed on him. Does this count as losing the game but winning life? Musian could rarely complain about himself at this time. He slowly closed his eyes. Not far away, Lan Feiying had just arrived and was watching the scene silently. Yelingxian's eyes showed some worry, but she hid it well. With the jade slip drawn by the sect master, it would block a fatal injury at the critical moment, and then transmit the cultivator out of the martial world. Although it was a pity that Brother Mu could not attend the Ascension Conference, he could only comfort him later. By the way, get rid of Wang Teng, the troublesome guy. Each girl reacted differently, but at this moment, they all stared at Musian nervously. In the crowd, Huang Manting's eyes flickered slightly, with a hint of seduction in her eyes, silently watching this scene. Musian seemed to smell a familiar fragrance and slowly opened his eyes. It was Wei Mengru, who had survived the thunder tribulation. She exuded a thick black mist and was walking in the air, rushing towards him. The yellow skirt clung to her body because of the cold wind, and her cold eyes were a little anxious. I can finally get Sister Mengru's favor this time, right? Musian complained in his heart. From this point of view, it seems that it is not a loss. He was about to close his eyes, but in the next moment, the figure of the maid in the yellow skirt was already close at hand. Musian was stunned for a moment, as if he did not expect Wei Mengru to come so quickly. Then, under the stunned Musian and countless dull eyes, Wei Mengru put one hand around the back of Musian's head, lowered her head slightly, and stared at Musian's eyes with clear eyes, which seemed to flash with moist luster. She slowly leaned down and kissed Musian's lips. Boom! It was as if a thunderbolt struck through the minds of the women. Even Ye Lingxian, who was just so strong, had a buzzing sound in her head. She was stunned and stared at this scene. The whole world seemed to be silent. The thunder tribulation seemed to be unaware of Musian and Wei Mengru. The thunder dragon swung its tail and flew towards other cultivators who were undergoing the tribulation. The area centered on Wei Mengru seemed to form a small protective circle, and there was no thunderbolt around them. Musian stared blankly at the face of the maid who was close at hand. Because of the active kiss, her face was stained with a faint blush, and her coldness was charming. At this moment, an extremely absurd guess flashed through his mind. She shielded the thunder tribulation?